When did you get an injury so dumb it nearly earned you a Darwin Award? I once injured my leg by jumping off the back of a moving truck so that I wouldn't be in trouble for riding on the back of a moving truck. There's a tool called a hay hook. It looks like a big capsin hook hand, except it's welded to a metal bar. You stab it into small bales of hay to make them easier to drag around. One day I missed the hay and hit my knee. I sneezed. It dislodged a herniated disc, causing me to collapse and rupturing my vertebrae, crippling me permanently. So yeah, I got crippled with a sneeze. Oh my god, that sucks. I was waiting to see a sneeze injury. I sneezed while driving a car and popped a rib and dislocated my jaw. I once broke my thumb trying to give someone a hug. Awkwardly caught it on their body and the ligament of my stretched thumb popped off and took some bone with it. When I was 5, I was stepped on by a llama. My mum said I had a llama foot-shaped bruise on my back for a couple of weeks. They closed the petting zoo after that. When it reopened, they no longer allowed people inside the animal pens. In January, I broke my rib trying to get a soda from the backseat of my car. I've hurt myself in many ways, so this was tough to figure out. A while ago, I was riding my bike and I saw a rabbit. I wasn't watching where I was going and rode off a retaining wall. I got a concussion from that. I snapped my humerus in half while arm wrestling. I did not find it as humorous as it sounds. When I was 6, my forehead was really itchy, but it was one of those deep itches that you couldn't really scratch out. So my bright 6-year-old brain told me to get to an all-fours position and try rubbing my forehead into the carpet. Well, I did that and ended up taking a small layer of skin off that took ages to heal completely. Imagine walking in on your child doing this. You'd think they were possessed. When I have kids, I'm already anticipating at least the first 8 years just being a bizarro horror show of insanity because of stuff like this, slowly giving way to the general frustration and resentment of their teen years. Good times. Hope you turn out okay by the time you hit 20, offspring. I broke my foot while practicing the finishing moves in Karate Kid. I was 20. I ended my brief interest in ballet by doing a grand jeet into a door and breaking my toe. I woke up, looked at the clock, had time before the alarm would go off and went back to sleep. Woke up again, looked at the clock, felt a pop and heard a sound in my neck. Torticollis. I had to call my dad to come to the college, help me down 3 flights of stairs and take me to the ER. It ruined my whole 2-week Christmas break. I turned my body in bed, left butt cheek cramped up and went out at an oblique angle, and I heard a pop. It was the day before my grandma died. 2 years of severe left lower back, hip, knee, and ankle pain. Trying to get treatment, but it's still stuck and popping and clicking. Luckily, not as painfully as before, though. My right shoulder and elbow are clicking because I did CPR twice in 2 days. Those were the only times I've had to do CPR, and just my luck it was back-to-back. Just insult on injury. In high school, as I was leaving, I saw a high jump, pad and bar on the field, so I decided to give it a try. When I landed on my back, my knee came down and I gave myself a black eye. Watching American football as a kid, my dad missed the play where one of the wide receivers injured his ankle. I tried to show him what had happened. Dad, he did this. And I ended up with the same injury. As a kid who'd just learned how to ride a cycle, I saw my auntie visiting us with a cake in her hand. I was so excited I rode hard and fast toward her and forgot to brake. I rode my bike into a wall and broke my hand. On a positive note, I got the biggest piece of cake. This wasn't me, but I was playing basketball with some friends one day and the topic of Derrick Rose's ACL tear came up. A friend of mine was confused how he could have gotten hurt on that play, so he tried to mimic exactly what Rose did to see if he could feel any pressure in his knee. And he tore his meniscus. I tore my meniscus 6 weeks ago and had surgery to repair it. Everyone keeps asking me if I did that playing sports, and I have to tell them, no, I in fact injured it rolling over on the couch. I'm 20 if that makes it any more embarrassing. I punched myself in the forehead during an improv comedy bit and gave myself a concussion. My sister said, "Hey, I want to shoot your BB pistol." So I gave it 10 pumps, handed it to her, walked over to the tire as I'm setting up the pop can on the tire, and she shoots me in the butt. Took a doctor 10 minutes to dig it out. Same. Except mine was my little brother and it was right above my crack. He apologized until he was well into his 20s, and last year, I guess he got tired of the teasing, he just said, "You know what? Screw it. Yeah, I did it on purpose." That really hurt. I'd just lost about 30 pounds and my belt was getting too big. Most people would say, "Oh, time to buy a new belt." And the craftier among us might say, "Oh, time to get out the leather punch." I said, "Time to dig a hole in the belt with my folding pocket knife." You can see where this is going. I was using my left hand for some reason. It folded in on itself while I was digging a new hole in the leather, and I cut my thumb to the bone, and had to go to urgent care to get it stitched up. My wife bought me a leather punching tool for Christmas that year. Also, to the people asking me, "Why didn't you use a nail or drill or whatever?" Well, I guess if I was smart, I wouldn't have been posting this, would I? I decided it would be quicker to walk down an incline of tennis ball-sized rocks and flip-flops with my hands full than walk around on the pavement. I was right. I descended very quickly. Having your hands full decreases brain functioning because you can only think about the fastest way to stop having your hands full. You tried your best. I tried to break a thread by wrapping it around my fingers and suddenly pulling. A thread of Kevlar. It cut my fingers to the bone. Severed 3 tendons in my left hand while slicing a bagel. Basic tendon repair went over well, but my middle finger got infected. They had to put a tendon from my leg into my hand. 3 surgeries over a frickin' bagel. Everyone keeps asking me if I ate the bloody bagel, and no, I didn't. My horse kneed me on my temple by accident while I was kneeling down bandaging his leg. He knocked me out cold for just a few seconds, and I ended up with a very swollen black eye for about 10 days. He was actually just getting a better footing, not being difficult at all, and it was just a tap. But I looked like I'd been KO'd by Lennox Lewis in round 1. I have another one. A horse once bit me in the chest, I'm a woman, and he bit me hard. I had a fun time explaining my injury to my mum. I got a fun scar too. Busted lip. I punched myself in the mouth while ripping a wax strip off my leg. The stupidest time I merely just hurt myself? That was peeing on an electric cattle fence because I thought it would be funny. It was, just not for me. And the stupidest proper injury? Well, one time when I was a kid, I was running around the yard, pushing the wheelbarrow. I hit a big root, went flying forward into the wheelbarrow, and ended up crashing into a tree like 40 feet down a hill. Oh look, that last one is just so perfectly cartoonish. I'm going to be disappointed if you didn't scream, "Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo!" like Goofy on your way down. Unfortunately, I can't suspend my disbelief enough to believe that you magically sprung up uninjured like aforementioned clumsy dog. On vacation in Florida, I'd forgotten my sandals at home and didn't want to wear shoes down to the beach. Figured I'd buy a pair later and was already the last of our group to arrive. So I walked down barefoot. The boardwalk ended up being a lot longer than it looked due to a twist and was made out of some odd, almost plastic composite material instead of wood. I have a very high pain tolerance. When I finally reached sand, my feet went from mildly uncomfortable to on fire. I had to be carried back off the beach. Second-degree burns on the entirety of both soles on my feet. I couldn't walk for a week. I still openly tell people it's one of the dumbest things I've ever done. I woke up with a sprained ankle. I still have no clue what I did before I fell asleep or in my sleep, but suddenly I woke up, my ankle was swollen, and I couldn't walk. I broke my foot on the way to the kitchen to get a muffin. I ate the muffin, lying on the floor with my foot propped up on a chair, trying not to cry. Priorities. And to clarify, my foot was asleep and I stepped on the side of it hard. They were poppy seed muffins from a mix my grandma gave me for Christmas. I fell through drop ceiling, thinking that it wasn't drop ceiling. It did not hold my weight. In my defense, there was a thick layer of dust. However, I did fall 10 feet, land on a cement floor, my back hit first and then my head, so I went to the hospital, I got all kinds of scans, and I got out of there with no injuries aside from a fractured vertebrae that was somehow already there. Go figure. So that's why it's called a drop ceiling. Well, this is a very high bar for me. I think this time I'll go with the time that I broke my arm because I was running and my feet got tangled in my parachute pants. This was well before MC Hammer was famous. I was wearing a costume. Think Disney's version of Aladdin. Except this was before that as well. Be right back, suing Disney. I gave myself a blood nose taking the cap off a particularly stubborn marker. I tore a rotator cuff cleaning the bathtub. Guy with a farm down the road asked, "Hey, can you come by help bale hay tomorrow?" Me, at 16, with no prior baling experience. Sure, I'll be there. I showed up in basketball shorts. I left looking like I spent 3 minutes in a broom closet with 5 cats and a vacuum cleaner that I couldn't shut off. I should clarify, the farmer was a nice guy. He laughed when he saw me, told me what I was getting into, and asked if I wanted to change to jeans. I was only a couple of minutes down the road, so I could have quickly changed. But I was young and stubborn, and it was hot, so I said no. His son, around my age, was also there, in jeans, and proceeded to laugh at my misfortune. It was a good time, though. Great experience, and a little under-the-table cash was also a great incentive. I've also had cats and had the unfortunate experience of being next to one or holding one when my mum turned a vacuum cleaner on. And that is exactly how I looked on my legs. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Around 6 months ago, I was waiting for my sister on my college campus. Around the same time, I'd accidentally gotten grease on my disc brakes, so they weren't stopping correctly. I had the great idea to stand the bicycle on the handlebars and spin the wheel from the pedals as fast as they could go on the highest gear, and then pinch the disc brakes with my thumb and index finger. This worked for a while, and I got a lot of grease off until my thumb got caught in the disc brake, causing it to be partially amputated and fracture to the bone. I needed 6 stitches, painkillers, and around 4.5 months for the skin to completely heal. 0 out of 10 would not recommend trying. One time I somehow sliced my thumb to the point of bleeding with my other thumbnail. It wasn't even sharp. No frickin' idea how I did it, and I just sat there for a good 5 seconds staring in disbelief at my bleeding finger before getting a band-aid. Also burst a blood vessel in my eye by sneezing too hard. I looked like a Bond villain for a bit. On a September morning 2019, I woke up for school. It's a Friday, I think the 19th. My family jewels were aching a little, but nothing too bad. I get up and take a shower. While I'm taking the shower, the pain gets way worse. I get out and dry myself quickly and then have to gag because of the pain. My mum gets alerted and comes to help me. I tell her to tell Dad, she doesn't have a license, that I need to go to the ER. I get dressed and off we go. The roads are smooth, so I didn't have the problem of going over bumpy roads at least. In front of the ER, there's a lady on a computer. I go up to her and say, "It's my testes." And my dad says, "It's probably a kidney stone," because we have that in our family. I go into the room and do the ultrasound thing on my kidneys. The pain goes up from my left jewel to my left arm, and I think I felt the pain in my throat too. I was undressed at this point with 3 men in the room and my dad. My body is shaking, my ADHD brain is all over the place, the doctor's looking at my kidneys and has checked the right one, then it feels like he takes 20 minutes to look for the left kidney, until I say, "My stones hurt, not my kidney." And he changes to the tip of the ultrasound thing to one that is pointy. And this dude, this motherfricker, he just rams that thing into my equipment sack like he wants to kill me. At that moment, I just remember cold, slow pain going from my reproductive storage units to the rest of my body, and I black out. When I wake up, I hear this noise of someone banging on the wall. When I look down, it's my legs, which are now uncontrollably shaking very violently. Someone's holding my legs down, which makes everything worse. The guy is like, "Yep, you have testicular torsion." And then they gave me pain meds. I get operated, everything is nice. I look at the damage afterwards in the hospital bed, and my Johnson just looks absolutely swollen and huge. In short, my left nut turned 180 degrees while I was sleeping, and it didn't get any blood. It was frickin' bad, man. I thought I was going to die. I had to get my sports ball bag cut open to pull my offending appendage out and turn it back around the right way. Wintertime Friday, weekend of the Super Bowl. I was running around high school in untied Timberlands. Friend was chasing me. I tripped and fell into a hallway door and sliced my head open. I hit the door so hard my Pokemon Blue version flew out of my back pockets, along with everything else in my pants. When the janitors cleaned up the mess, they brought me back a purple cartridge. The fact that I had to go back through this to determine what your injury actually was really showcases where your priorities were at the time of the accident. Then again, if I'd had a Game Boy as a kid, it would have been my most precious possession as well. Not so much stupid as in my fault, but the universe was definitely laughing at me. I decided I was finally going to get serious about running. I wanted to run for exercise for a while, but I was out of shape and just embarrassed. I finally mustered up the courage to go to the gym. I walk outside to let my dog go to the bathroom before I leave, and a wasp stung me on the lower side of my foot right in the arch because I was wearing sandals. I even had my workout clothes on and everything. My foot was the size of a softball for a week. And for clarification, I wasn't going to wear sandals to the gym, I just had them on to let my dog out before planning to put on actual running shoes. The wasp, I guess, had other ideas. The stupidest bee sting I've gotten was when I was driving the boat across the lake to the landing. I hit a wasp with my neck. So of course I slapped my hand to my neck. I got stung again on the hand. I think I might just be a bee or wasp magnet with how often I've been stung. Thankfully, I don't swell or have any sort of allergic response. Today, I was trying to open a can of stain. The screwdriver slipped and I stabbed it right into my other hand. So now I'm staining stuff with a small stab injury in one hand. I threw out my back, sneezing too hard. I was so embarrassed by the actual reason that I told everyone I was helping my mum move furniture. I was trying to reposition a tube for a ride at Waterworld right before going down it. I slipped on the first step and sprained my ankle. By the time I got done with the ride, it looked like a baseball in place of my ankle. It was only my second ride of the day. It happened earlier today. Put a mini bike on its kickstand, walked 2 feet, turned around and found the bike falling on top of me. I could have sworn I almost severed a muscle strand in my calf where the frame hit me. 5 years later, and I still have a small divot in my leg. Oh boy, I pinched a nerve stapling paper at an awkward angle. I had to go to urgent care. It was considered an on-the-job injury too. I was so embarrassed. I cut my thumb open to the bone while taking apart a Rubik's Cube with a skinning knife. I hit my pinky toe on the leg of a table. Instead of it just hurting or whatever, my entire foot was bruised. Tore a muscle in my butt while bending over putting laundry in the dryer. Broke my finger when punching down bread dough. Strained a muscle in my back while pooping. Dislocated my shoulder walking a dog. Pulled a plate, from a fused bone, off the bone. Ran headfirst into a street sign, and many, many more. I sprained my wrist racing my sister in an indoor gym. We made the finish line about a foot from the wall, and I ran straight into the wall at full tilt. All the time I broke my toe because I was running barefoot in the house and tripped over a dumbbell that I'd left in the middle of the floor. The first one is a little dumber in and of itself, but the second one is compounded by the fact that I was a full-on adult when it happened, so I didn't have the excuse of being a dumb kid. 4th grade, excited for my first ever youth soccer practice that afternoon, I kicked the solid wood coffee table in excitement that morning, nearly breaking my big toe. I did not get to go to practice. You know, I have an unfortunate talent of accidentally cutting myself on strange objects. All of these were very minor and needed a band-aid at most. I have cut myself on a microwave, a jar of honey, a piece of frozen ham, a locker, twice, and a pool table. I cut the ever-living F out of my finger opening a gosh darn bag of salad. Took a golf ball to the face. We were launching it out of one of those giant water balloon launchers. I pulled back as far as I could and let go. The ball stayed in the pouch and snapped back into my face right below my right eye. We're talking maybe half an inch from losing my eye. My zygomatic bone took it all, but surprisingly nothing broke. I just sprayed a ton of blood and had a massive black eye that migrated all over my face. I was deaf in one ear for about a week because I'd built a super pop-pop cracker. I'd taken 2 boxes of those pop-pops, or those paper snappers, and very carefully unwrapped each one. I emptied the contents into a tissue paper and twisted the end to form a huge pop-pop. I then accidentally dropped this inside the house, right on the tiled floors at my feet, where it exploded and echoed so loudly. My left ear kept ringing, and then I was deaf for days. My sister, who was 3 floors above me, heard it as well. Scraping the gunpowder off a roll of paper caps and then hitting the rather explosive pile with a hammer had a similar effect on me. I was in my mid-30s at the time, and it was actually my older brother who had the idea, and also him that wielded the hammer. The resulting bang was a bit louder than either of us expected. I threw out my shoulder, angrily moving a hotel pillow in the middle of the night. I had to go to a personal trainer to get a full range of motion back. Whoops! I also broke a tooth boxing at a party. We said no headshots, but now I have a crown. I made a volcano cake for an event. It looked awesome. Red velvet interior surrounded by chocolate to give it that stratovolcano look, whipped cream pyroclastic flows, and red sugar drizzles that I hardened and placed upright in the crater so that it would look like a lava burst. I tripped going up the stairs. I saved the cake by landing on my elbows, but one of the sugar lava pieces went up my nostril and sliced it. I pulled a hamstring getting out of bed. Look, the amount of you who've absolutely paralyzed yourselves just getting on and off your mattresses, or for the matter of fact just lying there, is absolutely mind-boggling and scary. I'll now dread the necessary act of sleep. According to the ER doctor, I fooshed, or fell on outstretched hands. Stepped on a rock, ankle gave out, braced my fall with my arms and hands. And the damage? I dislocated both elbows, broke off radial boneheads at the elbow. I had surgery to put a plate and pins on the left side. Radial head replacement surgery on the right one. There was absolutely no damage to the ankle that betrayed me. I chipped my pinky toe on plastic pool steps while I was swimming. Being a young kid obsessed with ninjas, I, at 4 years old, repeatedly jumped from our ottoman to kick the back of our couch in mid-air. I did it so many times that I broke my ankle. Teachers. How easy is it to tell if a student has a crush on another, and what interesting moments between the two can you share? High school teacher. Depending on the kids' personalities, they either get louder or quieter when their crushes are present. The loud ones are frickin' annoying. The quiet ones are the ones I would say purposefully sit next to their crushes. Oh god, I just realized that my 66-year-old GOV teacher totally knows. Teenagers are not subtle by nature, but they are amazingly oblivious when it comes to matters of the heart. They are really perceptive with other things, though. The boys almost never recognize if a girl likes them, and the girl never realizes that the guy is showing interest. It's funny to watch it happen. It's so blatantly obvious as an outsider, but I remember being just as oblivious as a student. It's called crushing self-doubt. I had a girl literally ask me out, and I slept on it and convinced myself she was just screwing with me in an attempt to embarrass me. Oh, similar to me, there was a girl me and my friends all liked in primary school. I said no in case they had bad intent. What if a girl was just too shy to find out herself? Back in 5th grade, I had a crush on a girl named Jenny. She was sweet and I really liked her, even if, innocently. Since this was 5th grade in the elementary school, I was in Boy Scouts with her brother, and my best friend told said brother that I had a crush on his sister, and he apparently passed it along to Jenny. Toward the end of the school year, she hands me a folded-up note telling me not to read it until after I got home. I waited like 5 minutes and popped that sucker open, and it's basically a confession that her brother told me that I liked her, but that he sometimes lies to her, and she just wanted me to check either yes or no. I was so embarrassed that her brother told her that I just ignored the letter completely. Oof. Well, to be honest, I know people who aren't much better attuned as grown adults either. I am completely oblivious to signals, as are a lot of my friends of all genders. Awkward story. My students are all between 8 and 10, and a few have noticeably hit the point where they're obviously starting to notice the opposite sex. I have 2 students that I'll give fake names. A boy, James, and a girl, Lucy, in my class. They're always together, recess, lunchtime, free choice, and the two are always working together. They're both very shy and giggly, and it seemed a mutual crush was there, noted by me and their math teacher as well. One day I hear James getting teased by some other kids for his crush on Lucy. His math teacher and I pull him aside and have a talk with him. We tell him that we'll be talking with the class as a whole about crushes and teasing. He's not the only one. His math teacher also tells him that if he does have a crush on Lucy, it's nothing to be embarrassed about because she's a nice, sweet girl. James just looks awkward and asks to go, so we let him. A few days later, I'm walking my kids out to the parent pickup, and I see Lucy's dad is here to pick her up. James waves to both of them as they leave, and I ask if he's been over to Lucy's house to play, and if he knows her dad. Yeah, miss, that's my uncle. Oh, crap. I've encouraged cousin love. I awkwardly gather my nerves to say, so you remember that talk we had about Lucy and liking her? Well, I didn't realize she was your cousin. Yeah, I thought you didn't. That was weird, miss. Then he just laughed and said he liked a different girl anyway in his older sister's class. In conclusion, 10-year-old is into cougars, not cousins. Oh man, the longing stares across the room, the almost wistful what-ifs you can just see in their eyes. When I was in middle school, that was me. Fortunately, the girls in the bar after 1:30 are usually drunk and desperate too. Not really. I close down the local bar about once a week. I'm happily married but friends with one of the bartenders, so I hang out until our shift is over if there are sketchy people, and there are almost always sketchy people. It's like the old saying, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. I had a toothless dude and his wife sit down next to me. She literally had a bandaged head wound, and he asked me for a threesome, so she wouldn't have to die not knowing a woman's touch. Computer science/computational physics university lecturer here. Men tend to outnumber women 10 to 1 in my lecture groups. Odd scenarios. My favorite being 4 of my students simultaneously being exceedingly into the same exceedingly pretty woman, who was in the realms of shy but unremittingly kind. She also happened to be a lesbian. I knew this and they did not. Of course, only 2 people could sit next to her in a lecture theater, and an actual friend of hers usually took one of those spots. So the 4 of them would try to play it cool as she sat down, and then desperately try to get as close as possible without giving the game away. Like a single round of musical chairs where only one person can win, but there's definitely never going to be a prize any of the players want. It's important to also be aware that these were nerds of the highest order, so at a certain point they were just running and shoving one another, charging down the aisle like the adults they apparently were. I was eventually forced to intervene and end the game when one of them, honest to God, vaulted a row of seats and nearly landed on another student. They deliberately avoided her after I pulled them aside, which was probably great for her, but terrible for me. I found their fruitless game a never-ending source of comedy. I'm a substitute teacher, and my favorite student with a blatant crush experience was with a 2nd grade class. I picked the kids up from the yard after recess, and a boy came to me very upset because one of the girls had been chasing him the entire recess. Once we got back to class, I talked with the girl asking for her side of the story. Conversation went something like this. Me. Jose was pretty upset about something that happened this recess. Do you want to tell me what happened? Girl. We were playing. He said you were chasing him. Is that true? Slight blush. Yeah. Do you think he wanted you to be chasing him? No. If you knew he didn't want to be chased, why were you chasing him? Huge blush, guilty smile, and hunched shoulders. He makes me laugh. It's funny how something that would be completely creepy and unacceptable in the realm of grown adults seems so cute when it's between little kids. Don't know what that says about us. I worked in a kindergarten for a brief period between high school and uni, and there were a couple of little 5-year-old girls who just walked up to the boys they decided they liked and kissed them forcefully, informing them that they were now their husbands. But the one that sticks to mind is the little 2.5-year-old from my group. She spoke only a little at the time and didn't bother much with learning the names of the grown-ups to any extent, but shortly before I left, they hired a really young guy, about 19, as an assistant. The girl sees him walking into the ward for the first time and just freezes. She actually dropped her toy and her eyes go round like saucers, her jaw dropping. It was both adorable and absolutely hilarious to watch. We introduced him and none of the kids were that fussed, but she just stood there, mouthing his name, whispering it to herself a few times to make sure she got it right. He sat down on the playmat with her and she couldn't take her eyes off him. She offered him a toy which he accepted gracefully, and I swear she lost her breath. From then on, she loved him. She was quite shy to begin with, walking up to him at times, saying his name, and then when she got his attention, she would giggle uncontrollably, blushing bright red, and run away. If he took sick days or didn't come in till late, she would get sort of depressed and not want to play much. All the kids played favorites with the assistants, little boys have their crushes and so on, but this one was a little different. It was as if she had decided he was her soulmate. He was so kind to her, and the kind of relationship they had was never anything that made you think anything creepy. He just couldn't bear to reject her. In the afternoons, he'd read to the kids for as long as they were willing to sit still and listen, and she always made sure to be the one to sit on his lap or next to him to flip the pages. I'm teaching 7th grade right now. It's crazy easy to tell. It makes me wonder if I was that oblivious when I was their age, or worse, if there were girls that were obvious towards me and I didn't notice. It's like they don't even hide it. One of my boys carries a girl's books every day. It's clear to me that he has a crush on her. I learned recently that she has a different one of these guys to carry her books between every class. I mean, that's just manipulative. She's got to know, right? Maybe, maybe not. As clueless as these guys are that carrying books isn't some grand romantic gesture, she may be just as unaware that's why they're doing it. Girlfriends do that stuff for each other all the time. We borrow and lend and carry and hide and all of that. So a guy doing that is basically doing friendship stuff from her perspective. Also, we pay attention to each other a lot. We notice if there's a new haircut or sweater or she's lost weight and all that. That's normal everyday behavior, especially for teenage girls. I've got a 9th grader and I've seen her around some of the guys in her orchestra. They bring her music over, ask with fixed and nervous smiles how she's doing today, sit next to her at picnics and stuff. One of them even asked her to get my recipe for baked beans. And you've got to be desperate for conversation when baked beans recipe seems to be the logical choice. But when I asked if there's any guys into her, she shrugged and says, "Nah, boys don't really notice me." I finally sat down and was like, "Look, I don't want you spilling this or embarrassing them, but Todd, Joe, and Mike, not real names, all like you. They can't come out and say it, but they are interested in you. Do whatever you want with that knowledge, but you should know what the signs of interest look like." And I laid it out for her. She honestly had no idea what low-key stuff looks like, because movies and all that are always big sweeping gestures, not quietly jockeying for a seat as 4th chair if you're 2nd, so they can sit next to you, or having your eyes way too wide open, or talking to you about some quite banal things just to talk to you. Not that I'm saying guys should all be super romantic and swing for the fences, but a huge number of dudes didn't realize they'd been flirted with over the years. Girls have the same problem. We're not exactly speaking 2 different languages, but we're sure as hell working from different subtexts. I'll say again, this is just confirming to me that a lot of adults are barely more evolved than kids in how they behave when it comes to matters of the heart. I have this one teacher that will totally just say anything that's on her mind. Once she just flat out said, "Do you guys like each other or what?" to these 2 kids in my class. Within 3 days, they were dating and still are. That could have just as easily resulted in them being super embarrassed and avoiding each other forever. I know a teacher who did this all of the time. She paired kids together so much in her mind that she was obsessed with getting 2 kids together. Once there was this girl who liked to hang out with this guy in her class. The very first day she asked if they were dating, and the girl just said no because she had a boyfriend, and they were very happy. For weeks, the teacher would ask if her and her boyfriend had broken up yet, so that her and this other guy could date. Eventually, the girl told her to stop because rumors were starting to spread around the school. Then the day came when the teacher asked and the girl just ran out of the room crying because her boyfriend actually broke up with her. Her and the other boy never got together, but it was funny to see my sister give our teacher the death stare for making her feel bad, even when the teacher told her to stop because it was making her uncomfortable. Band in high school is a funny place. Since kids are around each other a lot more of the time than the average student, they tend to get band goggles. It's pretty obvious to see relationships blossoming. More often than not, it's a good thing, but every now and again you get the older upperclassmen boys going after naive freshman girls. And boy oh boy does that turn ugly quick. The drama can be outrageous. Funniest, most shocking moment, a girl who's an awesome student had been dating a true player on and off for the last year. She went so far to tell me that she got back together with him after he cheated on her. So literally last Friday, I'm sitting in the band hall watching the kids practice. This sweet girl comes into the hall and is walking with a sense of purpose. As she passes me, she says something under her breath that I didn't quite get the first time. Confused by what she said, I watch her walk up to the guy. She grabs him by the shoulders and spins him around. She says something to which he responds with a short answer, but had that look on his face that he got caught doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. She then balls up her fists and socks the guy 4 to 5 times and then storms off. At that point, I realized that what she said was, "Teacher, you're gonna have to write me an office referral." Best referral ever. I teach English. I remember a star football player, senior, coming into the room to rap with me for a bit before the 3rd period start every Friday. In my 3rd period, a female student, junior, of mine, who was extremely intelligent and very pretty, yet somewhat shy being an AP student and all, was sitting in the front row and always stared at him when he came in. He would talk about football and stuff with me, and every so often I'd look back at her still staring right at him and smiling the entire time. She would not turn that smile off no matter who was looking or what anyone said. It was actually one of the cutest/saddest things I've ever seen, seeing as how the guy never even turned around to notice her. If he did, who knows, maybe they would have hit it off. Maybe they did after they weren't my students. Is no one going to question that a football player rapped with you during school? Do you teach at East High? Okay, after 5 people writing me to tell me the meaning of the word rap, I think that no one needed to. At the very least, you guys should have just seen I was making a pop culture reference. Former 6th grade teacher here, I was here to witness one of my kids take his first big leap, at lunch. He asked the girl he had a crush on, "Will you go on a date with me?" She smiled and said yes. Immediately, the boy on the other side of her said, "Don't go out with this screwbag, go out with me." She smiled and said okay. He was pretty shattered for the rest of the week. He was in the same class as the girl, so there was a lot of longing looks and wistful sighs. I'm pretty sure that's the kind of thing you remember forever. Middle school is tough, man. I wasn't a teacher. I was a teacher helper? I mean, it was only 6th grade, but it was extremely easy. Looking at everyone facing you, you start to realize what people are focusing on. I know when kids are texting because they look straight at me and every 2 minutes look down for 2 seconds and have their hands under the table. For a crush, it is the long stares at the back of their crush's head while fiddling with an object like the pencil or their hair. As a quick look away when the crush looks at them, it's easy. God damn, how many of our teachers were chuckling under their breath watching our antics at school? Anyone else wondering? Oh, it's painfully obvious most of the time. Here are some things I saw. Continuous glances at the same person. Body language that positions the person closer to the other person. Interjecting into a conversation that the person was not engaged in to begin with. Being helpful more so for that person than for anyone else in class. Flirting, obviously. Boastful storytelling. A lot of times it's outlandish and very obviously untrue. Hanging around the other person uninvited. And checking out the other person while oblivious to their surroundings. What's funny is that most people think they're being sneaky or inconspicuous. From my vantage point in the front of the classroom, these things seem so obvious as to be genuinely painful to observe. It was especially painful when the feelings were intentionally unreciprocated. I taught in college for a bit, if you're wondering. I'm not a teacher, but in 6th grade, 2002, a girl in my class, history with Mrs. Thompson, sat in the next row over from me every day. I was crushing on another girl and ignorant of the fact that she liked me. Midwinter, Mrs. Thompson is handing back papers and stops between the two of us while glancing back and forth and says something along the lines of, "I don't know who to give this paper back to." She says the girl's first name, or Mr., my last name. Mrs. Thompson hands the paper back to her. She'd been practicing writing her name with my last name so much in her notebook, apparently like many teenage girls do, that she had accidentally written it on her homework when she handed it in. 6 years later at my high school graduation, a half dozen of my former teachers, including Mrs. Thompson, were sitting around talking with my friends and me and brought up that paper where a girl had written my last name on her paper. They found it cute and endearing and told other various stories of middle school love. A year and a half ago, I married that girl. College perspective. I can usually tell which of my students have hooked up. I can almost always tell when the girls are crushing on guys in my classes. It's usually painfully obvious, especially from the perspective of the front of the room. I can also tell that you're texting, no matter how much you work to camouflage it. Sometimes when I assign group work of any kind, I like to intentionally split up or subvert the secret lovebirds, just to see how they react. I'm a bit of a sadist like that. Oh, freshmen, all pheromones, alcohol, romantic overconfidence, and a complete lack of experience with the real world. So much fun. I work in college and teach early morning classes to 17 to 24-year-olds, mostly. It's painfully obvious who just did a walk of shame to class and occasionally who's screwing someone else in the room. The most awkward thing that ever happened was some guy who came into the class and interrupted a lecture to hit on a girl in the front row. He wasn't even a student, just some idiot who walked by our open campus and recognized the girl through the window as the girl who he saw at Jack in the Box a week earlier. He comes in and just starts talking to her. I'm in such shock that this guy just randomly walked in that I was speechless and just stood there watching it. After about a minute, I came to my senses and realized the situation. Here's this 40-plus-year-old dude, tatted up with his pants hanging from his butt, reeking of booze and cigarettes at 9 a.m., hitting on a very uncomfortable-looking tiny blonde, 18 years old. I told him this is my classroom and that I wouldn't have him interrupting. He would have to go. He didn't put up a fight, he just asked when the class was over so he could come back to mac him some. I told him we were out at noon. We were really done by 10, and that was the last day of class. The day of the final, a week later, on a different room, I kept my eyes open, but he never showed. I asked the student, but she only knew him from a single instance of standing in line in front of him at Jack in the Box. I teach 16-year-olds. When a girl likes a guy, she'll draw hearts on his notes. When a guy likes a girl, he'll draw male anatomy on her notes. That might be the greatest thing I've read in this collection of stories. A couple met in my high school chemistry classroom. This was 3 years ago. He was a junior in high school, she was a sophomore. They told me last fall that when the date is set, I'll be invited to the wedding. Best example of chemistry ever. This actually happened in my acting class just today. Our teacher said he had an exercise to show us how much subtext there is under the surface of our actions. Pick a person in here who you have something you desperately want to say something to and never could. Think about it really hard and don't make eye contact with them or they'll know. Everyone in this class knows each other very well. There's a lot of dirt to stir up. The silence was deep and uncomfortable. Now, go ahead and say it. You could hear their buttholes pucker. People looked numb with fear and hesitation. The teacher, having proved his point about rich subtext, opened his mouth to end the exercise before anyone could actually speak. Now, just then a kid jumped up from his chair arduously and let loose with, "Sadie, you're hot as hell and I want to frick your brains out." The room exploded. The result was pandemonium. One kid was laughing so hard he nearly tipped his desk right over onto the floor. The teacher was in shock. The kid was red in the face and laughing uneasily. The amazing thing was the girl. She didn't smile, didn't acknowledge it, nothing. She just sat there, stock still, like Marie Antoinette at the guillotine, totally above the situation. I think she must have been mortified and didn't know what to do. The teacher's response: "I have been doing that exercise for decades, and no one has ever actually said anything." The next day, and I crap you not, I saw this kid and Sadie walk in, a little apart, both grinning. He was listening to a song on her iPod. They both fell asleep in class. Great success.
Doctors of Reddit, what is your most "oh my god, what is that" moment while treating a patient? Content warning, literally all of these are disgusting. Like, seriously, if you don't have a strong stomach or are easily squeamish, do not listen to or watch this video. With that being said, let's move on to the video. Well, I'm not a doctor yet, but here's a story from one of my professors. This was in rural Alabama. This middle-aged married couple had presented to the ER after they had been drinking for almost the entirety of the evening and got into a heated argument. Things got heated, and the woman eventually fell off the porch of their trailer into the shrubs a few feet below. The husband, in his drunken state, suddenly dropped the argument and came to his wife's aid. She didn't suffer anything too serious, just a couple scratches here and there, except for what the man said looked like a piece of glass or pipe or something that became lodged in the woman's arm when she hit the ground. He decided to not come to the hospital because he could remove this object himself. He got his largest pair of pliers and gripped onto this glass/pipe-looking thing lodged in his helpless wife's arm. He clamped down and pulled, cranked and cranked, trying to remove this object, and it wouldn't budge. With his masculinity defeated and the alcohol wearing off on both of them, they decided it's sensible to finally come to the ER. Upon arriving to the ER, the doctor immediately realized this poor woman had a compound fracture of her humerus, and this, quote, pipe or piece of glass thing was her bones sticking through her skin that her husband was trying to pry out with a pair of pliers. True story. Yeah, for anyone who's played Far Cry 2, those healing animations are what not to do in a situation where you break your bones. Content warning, this one's really gross. OBGYN rotations. I was delivering my first baby. It was an older lady from the rural side of town. When I asked her to push as the baby had fully crowned, a wad of worms exited her anus. I'm talking at least 60 live worms. I gagged so hard, but managed to keep a straight face throughout and delivered the baby. I realized then and there that OBGYN was not for me. Oh my god! That's enough internet for today! I am a surgery resident. I once helped operate on a man whose face was chewed off by a bear. I had to find little scraps of skin at the edges of the hole in the middle of his face and tried to decide where they went to try and make the damage smaller. I also saw a patient come to the emergency department with a Barbie in their rectum. He apparently puts the arms up and legs down like a diving position, rubber bands the arms together, then places it in his rectum for a time. When he wants it out, he takes laxatives, only this time, it got stuck. The kicker? When we removed it, he asked for it back. Number 1. Maggots on a gangrenous foot. Both times, I almost lost my lunch. The worst part was that the second time I knew exactly what the faint crunching meant. Oh my god. But I still had to remove the sock/shoes. Number 2. Telling a highly addicted PT that I wouldn't be giving him the narcotic RX he wanted after he had run out of his prescribed meds early because he took too many. This was actually the only time I've ever said frick to a patient. I'm not giving you an RX. I also spoke with your pain management doctor, and he does not want me to feel anything for you since you made the choice to take too many of your medicines. The patient starts flapping arms and legs in bed. What are you doing? I'm having a seizure. That's not a seizure, that's a tantrum. Patient gets completely still, looks me straight in the eye, and craps his pants. What the frick did you do that for? Because you're not giving me the medicine I need. Now you have to tell the nurse to come clean me up. Yeah, no. I will have the nurse bring you a clean gown and a towel. Bathroom's right next door. This was in med school, dermatology rotation. I got to see my own patient, so I asked what the problem was. He told me he thought his genital warts were back. I asked why. He didn't say a word, but turned around, dropped his pants, spread his butt cheeks, and showed me a cluster of genital warts around his anus at least 10 centimeters in diameter. Even when he stood up straight, it was just sticking out of his buttocks. I put up my most professional voice to say, yes, I think you're right. The man thought this was hilarious. I'm not sure if I've not seen more surprising things after this, or I've just gotten used to them. ER nurse here. We brought a code trauma off the helicopter. A lady who was a passenger in a really bad wreck. Her husband was driving and was dead at the scene. Once we got her stable, the OR staff came to take her to surgery. I gathered up the clothes that we had cut off of her and grabbed her purse that EMTs had removed from the car. There was a lot of blood on it, so I thought I should just grab her wallet instead. I reached in and grabbed what I thought was her wallet, pulled it out. It had hair. It was a chunk of her husband's scalp. I interned in a city that gets very cold in the winter. Homeless people who were having a tough time surviving outdoors would come to the ED to get admitted, even if just overnight. They get a warm bed, a few hot meals, and a cleanup. This one fellow was in really rough shape, couldn't walk. The poor nurses did most of the cleanup, delousing, sponge bath, dressing the open sores. My job was to do the physical exam, including the mandatory rectal. Literally had to lift that scrawny flap of a butt cheek and pick the encrusted dirt/feces/matted hair away from the rectum to expose the anus. Thankfully, I only had to turn 180 degrees to reach the sink that I dry heaved into. But before this fellow can be discharged, he needs a podiatry consult. His black, gnarled feet have thick yellow big toenails that have grown in a circle and are now piercing the bottom of the toe, the reason he can't walk. Podiatrist intern comes in, starts a foot soak, and proceeds to tackle those nails with something that can only be described as modified tin snips. Now you know how some people have that habit of opening their mouth when concentrating really hard? Yup, he clipped that nasty nail and it flipped right into his mouth. We shared the sink. It's okay, Ryan. You've only got 13 more minutes to go. You're gonna be fine. Story from one of my friends who worked as a paramedic in Hamburg for some time. Mind you, this is disgusting. They were called to an unconscious person, drug addict, who was slumped down on a park bench close to the train station where back in the days the most drug addicts would hang around. They approached the guy and tried to wake him up, checked his vital signs, etc., then put him on the ground. He had no shoes on, but only wrapped up his legs in plastic bags. If you have ever been around hardcore drug addicts, you know most of them don't smell too good. After a while, they just give up on personal hygiene, which incidentally is actually more dangerous than the drug itself, since they tend not to treat their scabs and whatnot. This guy reeked to high heaven, and once they proceeded to check his plastic bag shoes, they saw why. His legs up to his knees were completely black and full of maggots. He had an infection in both legs due to shooting up heroin and never treated them. My friend said that once they lifted the plastic bags up a little, which were melted into his decaying flesh, little mountains of maggots would fill around his feet. Hands down, one of the most disgusting things he has seen. Doctor here. When I was working in the ER one evening, I had my worst experience so far. I was called to one of the examination rooms that are designed for infectious patients. This is already a bad sign, as it usually involves some sort of abscess that needs to be drained. However, this time, it was far worse. I was told by the nurse that it involved a man who had bilateral venous ulcers on his legs and that they were now infected. I looked through his journal and saw that he last saw a doctor about 10 months earlier and no note of any checkups after, not by a nurse or a GP. Therefore, I asked my nurse when someone last took a look at his legs. Quote, not since his last journal entry. Then I asked when was the last time he changed his dressings on the legs. Quote, he hasn't. Some background info on the patient. Old man who lived by himself in his trailer that was parked in the middle of a forest. He had no running water. He was a bit of a drinker and a general I don't give a crap mentality. Awesome. Suited up and went into the room. The room smelled like an odd combination of stale beer, mold, and disease. Certain infections smelled different, and this one was very pungent, almost sulfuric. I introduced myself to the patient, who didn't understand what the heck he was doing there. All he wanted was some antibiotics for a flu, and then he was sent here. Why the heck do you want to look at my legs for? They were already taken care of last year. Great. So we started unfolding the dressing. They were crusty and crackled as we unwrapped the first leg. As we got deeper, it changed color to some sickly yellow, and the stench became worse and worse. One of my nurses left the room to throw up. Then I saw it. Very small, but inside a fold, there was a little maggot who squirmed. Crap. When we finally got to the wound, we saw all the little maggots feasting on this man. There must have been 50 of them. The stench was absurd. I was focusing a lot to breathe through my mouth, but then I felt like I could taste it, which made it even worse. My nurse came back and promptly went out again. I unwrapped his other leg, and same story there, but the infection was much deeper, and I could see a few tendons on the base of the ulcer. Absolutely delicious. We had to clean off the maggots and place them in a bowl, but they were squirming and went on the floor and crawled all over the place. I had to watch my feet so I didn't step on them. After that, we took the patient to hose him down to at least try to get rid of some of the smell. Then booked to the OR for debridement and a fresh vacuum dressing. Discharged a few days later with strict instructions and booked him in to return for redressings and checkups. Then, we never heard from him again. TLDR, maggots. Lots of maggots. Removed a shoe from a patient with a severe diabetic foot. 2 cockroaches crawled out of it. Paramedic here, working in the ER one night. We had a guy come in complaining of groin pain, so we bring him back, and it turns out he has a master lock, the kind with the spinning dial that you used to secure your locker at school, locked around his member. Essentially, blood could flow in, but could not flow back out, so this thing was hugely swollen. He had panicked after he realized he could not remember the code, dealing with a real genius here, and he took a screwdriver to the dial and snapped it off. So, we consulted with urology, and the urologist wanted to take him to surgery, cut his ween lengthwise, slide the top out, then the bottom, and then suture it back. Needless to say, the patient wasn't thrilled with option A, so option B was for this big nurse, we'll call him Tom, to go in with bolt cutters and cut it off. Option B selected, curtain closes. Tom gives a 1, 2, 3. A loud scream at 3, a pop noise. Tom exits with a broken lock, and the man was sent to the floor to recover. That's just one of so many, but I always tell that one. A bit late to the party, but here's my contribution. I have some nasty pus stories, but I think the top post wins hands down in that category, so here's something a bit different. Just a couple of months ago, actually. Woman about 35 years old comes in for a pap smear. Okay, no problem. Put the speculum in and maneuver it around a little bit to find the cervix, and I see something dark brown in the right lateral fornix. My first thought was, oh crap, cancer. You see, when I was an intern, I had a patient on whom I found very dark, friable tissue on the posterior wall of the upper genitalia, which eventually turned out to be rectal cancer that had spread into the genital wall and was quite advanced. You know, one of those patients you kind of never forget. Anyway, I try and gently scrape at this dark brown area to get a feel of what it was when the smell hit me. I imagine if death itself died and rotted for a few weeks, this is what it would smell like. My medical assistant scooted away to the edge of the room. Poor thing couldn't leave the room as she was my chaperone. I stopped breathing through my nose and started to breathe only a couple of times a minute from my mouth, of course turning my head away from the source of the smell to take a breath. Anyway, maneuvering the speculum a bit more and scraping a bit at the brown area some more revealed an answer to the mystery. It was a cylindrical, thick wad of something. An old tampon. The patient had no idea that it was there, and her period had ended over a week ago. So this thing had been there for over a week, and the lady was walking around living life as usual. Thankfully, she did not get toxic shock syndrome. Retrieval of the tampon was uneventful, and the lady was sent home with advice on being more careful with remembering to take out tampons or perhaps consider switching to pads instead. Imaging tech here, so I basically look at black and white images of people's innards. Once I had a guy, and it looked like his abdomen was filled with fluid, but it looked very odd. Then I realized the fluid was moving. The guy had the biggest aortic aneurysm I've ever seen, so big I couldn't measure it on my machine. He got sent off to the hospital. I was in outpatient services that day, and I don't know what happened to him. I also had a woman with so many holes in her heart, in the muscle between the heart chambers, that it was like Swiss cheese. Another time, I was in a prison scanning a con. He'd been shot and all of his abdominal muscles were removed. He wore a Velcro girdle to keep his stomach in place. I put my scanner down on his abdomen, and I had to figure out what organs he was missing, because he had some removed from after being shot, but he had no clue. I think he was missing a kidney, the gallbladder, part of the liver, and like half his pancreas. Token, not a doctor, but I am a nurse and I have a story. I was working in the emergency department one afternoon, and we had an elderly lady just calling out, help me, repeatedly all afternoon. She was brought in by her nursing home for, quote, agitation, which is normally code for they can't handle them anymore. So the patient was placed with the carer assistant to try and calm her down and make sure she didn't wander around the ward. The carer was helping to feed the patient, and I walked past when suddenly the lady just breathed her liquid diet in and collapsed backwards. I, of course, instantly pushed the med emergency button and everyone comes running from all over. We assess her airway and it's deemed clear but not self-supporting. No food in there, which was strange. She wasn't breathing and no heartbeat was present, so one of the male nurses starts compressing on her chest while another nurse tries to insert an airway. As he compressed on her chest, a literal fountain of murky green goo spurted from her mouth all over the walls, ceiling, medical staff, literally everywhere. And of course, we were all like, what the heck is this crap? And the poor male nurse had to keep compressing the chest while the other nurse kept trying to suction the patient's airway to clear it enough to insert an airway. After 5 or 6 minutes, the nurse finally gets the airway in after suctioning over 6 liters of this goo. And after some defib, the doctor declared the patient dead. The bay and the surroundings say 5 or 6 meters was just drenched in this slimy, murky, brown-green mess. It was absolutely, breathtakingly disgusting. Eventually, we found out the poor old lady had a massive bowel obstruction, had a cardiac arrest while eating, and the goo was days and days of liquid fecal matter. Safe to say, I scrubbed myself raw in the shower that night. Content warning. This one's pretty sad, violent, and messed up. On my first weeks in trauma ER, 4th year of med school, we had an 11-year-old girl come in who was literally dumped out of a car in front of a hospital with one side of her body completely mutilated. What remained of her limbs just hanging like huge chunks of meat, and the rest of her body was burned all over. And there was so much blood. Maybe it's because I panicked a little, but I don't think I've ever seen so much blood in my life. We later found out someone in her family, father or cousin, not sure, was a known criminal who had just got out of jail time for blowing up ATMs with homemade explosives. They claimed she found a stash they had hidden, but we really believe she was helping them pack it. Either way, it was the ugliest/saddest thing I've ever seen. Thankfully, this next story is a lot cheerier. I was working as a scribe when we went to see an 8-year-old girl that had a fever. Nothing too remarkable until we started the physical exam. We examined her head, normal. We examined her upper extremities, normal. Then we pulled up the blanket to examine the lower extremities. Her feet were the size of an infant's. You should have seen the look on the doctor's face as he was trying to figure out how the girl's feet got so small. The mother looked up at the doctor, saw the look of confusion on his face, and said, "Those aren't her feet." She pulled up the blanket a little further, revealing a pair of perfectly healthy feet, nestled next to the feet of a doll that she had put under the blanket. We saw the doll's feet and thought they were the girl's. For those wondering, she had the flu. She turned out fine. Paramedic here. Back when I was a rookie, we ran a call to assist the police with an injured person. Get on scene to 5 to 6 cops and a large naked man in cuffs sitting on the curb. In the middle of February, in the mid-Atlantic region. Check the guy out while talking to the cops. Apparently, he had decided to smoke some PCP and the cops ended up having to tase him. The part of the story you've been waiting for, one taser barb in the umbilicus and the other in the head of his member. TLDR, PCP leads to a new member piercing courtesy of the police. Last one, I promise. Surgical registrar here. I was working in a smallish hospital in a rural town in Australia. We were asked by the medical team to see a patient that had been admitted under their care by the emergency department overnight. Happens quite often in that hospital, with the CT demonstrating a very distended bladder. They apparently had trouble with the catheter, so they called me to have a look. With much hesitation, I went up to see her on the ward. So I managed to put the catheter in with a lot of trouble. This lady was fecally incontinent. A little bit of urine drains out, and I just keep thinking, something's not right. I go back and look at the CT scan, and the IDC placed in the emergency department looks like it's appropriately positioned, subsequently pulled out. Behind it was one big sucker of a uterus, absolutely full of what appeared to be a fluid density. The report read, along these lines, I crap you not, as follows. Conclusion. There is a very distended bladder. The catheter balloon is situated in the prostatic urethra. Moderate to severe hydronephrosis is noted. To all the people pointing out that women don't have prostatic urethras, I'm well aware. That was the whole point. The radiologist was very embarrassed and apologetic when I called him to amend the report. Long story short, I speak to the consultant. We get her to theater. With great difficulty, we manage to dissect our way around this huge uterus, and we call the O&G guys to come and help get it out. Unfortunately, during this process, the uterus bursts, and there is a boatload of pus that just streams out. It smells so freaking horrible. There are people gagging around us at this yellow-green, sulfuric-smelling goo. The scrub nurse can no longer take it and vomits in her mask. The consultant is looking at me like, screw you for bringing this to theater. We finished this case and I am so glad. I get home and I keep thinking, I can still smell this awful thing. I have another hour-long shower. All night I can still smell this thing. Morning comes, I can't have breakfast because I can still smell it. I get to the hospital and everyone is wearing masks. Apparently, the smell was so horrible, and the extraction in our theater was so outdated that it had somehow pumped the smell into the vents around the hospital. All night, small amounts were leaking out into the atmosphere, causing this horrendous smell. Silver lining? Lady lived for another 3 years. TLDR, I operated on a lady with a huge uterus full of pus. Consultant hated me for the rest of the year.
Medical professionals. What's something ridiculous you've had to explain to your patients? Story from 2015. To an 84-year-old man with a candlestick in his rectum. That you don't need to massage your prostate with a candle once a month. A doctor had apparently told him 15 years ago to do this, and he had not questioned it since. I was gonna say, well, it was a different time, but then I realized 15 years ago was the year 2000. September changed a lot of things, man. Firefighter/EMT here. Just because you're taking medication for something doesn't mean it's going to go away. Here's a real conversation that happens about once or twice per shift at minimum. Me. Do you have any medical history, diseases, sicknesses, and/or conditions I should be aware of? Patient. No. Are you currently taking or supposed to be taking any medications? Yeah, I'm on insert 12 different medications here. Ah, I see one of your medications is metformin. Are you a diabetic? Not anymore. I just told you I take meds for it. Me. Sigh. I had to explain to my 75-year-old grandmother that there isn't one straight tube connecting your ears. She put eardrops in, put cotton in her other ear before she laid down so it wouldn't leak out the other side. Those instructions must have gone in one ear and out the other. Having to explain that I can't figure out what's wrong with them over the phone. My mom called me and asked me what the rash on her elbow was. After 5 minutes of trying to explain that I needed to see the rash, I finally asked her what she thought of the shirt I was wearing. It took her a couple of seconds to figure it out. I mean, that's just a special level of ignorance right there. In the words of Ron Burgundy, I'm not even angry, I'm impressed. You're more likely to die from a dental abscess than dental x-rays. Dr. Oz is full of crap. I also hate it when people say, well, if they're so safe, then why do you step out of the room? And they act like it's fricking stumped me. The reason I step out of the room when taking x-rays is because I do that almost every day. You get it once every 3 years. I don't know if this is a good analogy, but you equate it to a bartender asked to share his drink with a customer. You can have a drink every once in a while, but if the bartender has to drink with every customer, he'd be very sick. Overweight lady with some liver damage. Had many conversations about diet and reducing alcohol intake. Patient had cut out whiskey and vodka, but did not know that Guinness had alcohol. Yes, this was in rural Ireland. About no alcohol. Alright, I'll just stick to Guinness then. No, that has alcohol in it. Really? But what about stout? Porter? IPA? Lager? Ale? Cider? My personal favourites are when the families of a loved one bring in food that's completely counter to their current medical condition. Off the top of my head, I've had a family bring in a get-well cake to their dad, who was on his 5th or 6th admission to DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis. He was still on an insulin infusion, and the family didn't see the problem with giving him a cake because he woke up and was hungry. I've had families order in pizza to have a pizza party when their parent is admitted on the cardiology ward and on a salt and fluid-restricted diet due to extensive heart failure. Good times. When I had my appendix removed, every fricking body brought me food. I had to go a week without anything, and they kept bringing me food. Returning visitors, food again. Only one person brought me a book to actually pass the time. I was crying and giving the food away, and crying and giving it away. It was awful. It is hard-coded into our DNA, I suppose. Just like every grandma resolves every situation with food, thus we are bound to go down the same road. I'm diabetic. I have a family that does these things. I tell them, no, I can't eat that. They insist that I can have a little bit, right? Hand me a huge slice of cake. No, I can't even eat a little bit. They try to make me feel guilty for not eating the cake they brought me. I have specific instructions now when I'm at the hospital. I'm currently under medical quarantine. I cannot be disturbed. It's weird to pretend to have MRSA. Medical professional here. Have many stories that fit the bill. One that sticks in my mind is a patient, 15-year-old kid that suffered a traumatic head injury, was in the ICU barely able to speak, obvious cognitive impairments due to the injury, and the family was strictly instructed to refrain from feeding him anything. Nothing by mouth, no water, nothing. The next morning I get an emergency page from the ICU because the patient is going into respiratory failure. I rush over to see the pulmonologist and nursing staff performing CPR on the kid. The parents are outside the room freaking out. Sadly, the kid didn't make it. Upon the autopsy, they pulled out a pepperoni slice, crust, and green jello from the kid's lungs. It was devastating as hell to tell the kid's parents that they killed him by sneaking him in food. The kid's throat muscles were so weakened by the brain injury that most of the food was ending up in his lungs. The parents thought that the medical team wasn't feeding him for yucks. The only way they could convey their love for him at this time was to give him foods he loved. Tragic lesson learned, I hope. That was pretty upsetting. I can't even imagine living with the knowledge of what happened. Let the rest of us know not to do this, folks. Paramedic friend of mine has had to explain to multiple people that diabetes is not something that everyone ends up getting in life. When a woman lets her diabetic son eat ridiculous amounts of sugar, then gets him to run around in the yard to burn it all off because I don't like pumping him full of all that insulin. That's not how this works, lady. Shadowed a dentist in a rural area where most patients were in poverty. One guy was so confused on why his teeth were rotting. He revealed that his diet consisted of sugar, and alcohol. The dentist had to explain sugar can lead to enamel loss. The guy said, "Nope, that's a lie. My wife is a dentist and had a similar patient tell her that it wasn't the sugar but the fluoride in the water that causes decay." I was in hospital with my girlfriend while the nurse undressed her. The nurse asked if it was all right for me to be in there. She knew we were together, and we said yes with a confused look. She then told us the story of a couple in their 80s who were in, and when she took down the wife's top to check her heartbeat, the husband covered his eyes and ran out of the room while the wife burst into tears. 40+ years of marriage, and they'd never seen each other in the nude. That's sad. Really, really frickin' sad. Taking a medication twice a day does not mean taking the doses together. One dose now, one dose later. Not both doses now. On a side note, don't give your son your sleeping medication. Ever. I remember in a country doctor's notebook, this young doctor who had just started in rural Russia, initially with no clue what the frick he was doing, and making it up as he went along for some stuff, had a patient with an infection of some sort. The guy was very smart and he enjoyed having an intellectual conversation with him, gave him the pills and sent him on his way. Then, a few days later, he saw the same guy in for a med OD. He said, "It was going to take weeks taking those pills, so I decided to just take them all at once and be done with it." A side note, this was adapted into a short series starring Jon Hamm and Daniel Radcliffe and is available on Netflix, called A Young Doctor's Notebook. It's really great. Radcliffe does a great job as the doctor. Repeat patient of the STD clinic I work at. Isn't there something I can buy, like over the counter, so I don't have to keep coming back in for chlamydia? Me. Contraceptive? Dirty patient. Nah, miss, I meant like a tea or something. When the doctors or nurses tell you it's a very bad idea to leave AMA or against medical advice, you should take their advice. Several years ago when I was a phlebot, a person who drew blood, I went to the nursing station so I could grab someone to follow me into the room. The patient was given a clot-busting drug, TPA. This stuff makes heparin look like child's play, and I would need to have a nurse hold pressure on the puncture site for at least 5 to 10 minutes to see if it had stopped bleeding in that time. The nurse told me stone-faced that they left AMA. After that drug, falling down could cause serious injury because you just don't clot at all. He was back in ER a short while later. Another lady decided that even though she was in the ICU, that since she got 4 units of blood and felt much better, it'd be okay for her to go ahead and leave. No, it's not okay. That's stupid. In nursing school, my labor and delivery teacher was covering contraceptives and demonstrated how to show patients how male contraceptives are used by putting them on our thumb. At the end of it, she emphasized, "Make sure you tell them that it doesn't actually go on their thumb, and that the way you put it on a thumb is how it should be placed on someone's manhood." I had a patient that was truly concerned that his cancer was contagious. He wanted to know how to keep his puppy from contracting it. He was literally more concerned about his tiny puppy getting cancer because of him than his own health. I'll never forget the joy and relief I saw in his eyes when I told him he could have all the puppy cuddles he wanted. For those of you wondering, the puppy cuddles were curative, of course. Aw man, that's super sweet. Dumb as heck, but still super sweet. For the purposes of surgery, vodka is not a clear liquid. I've been lied to by every one of my Russian homeopathic instructors, and I am going to demand a refund. Ooh, I have another one. I'm a nurse in general surgery. My patient had a note in her chat to not let her have any of the cups in the room, which I thought was strange. We've had other orders before for other patients saying they weren't allowed to have any metal utensils. The patient loved to swallow spoons and forks, but that's another story. But this was something new. I quickly found out why when I walked into her room for a morning report, and several cups of urine were sitting on her sink. Apparently, she was too lazy to get out of bed to pee, so she had her husband sneak in some more cups to conveniently pee in. No, peeing in a cup is not allowed. This happened multiple times after multiple talks with the patient, hence the order. Since I'm getting a lot of requests for the spoon dude, unfortunately it's not a very exciting story. He was a young gentleman in his late 20s and early 30s who came somewhat frequently to our floor for retrieving silverware from wherever it got stuck in his GI tract. Some people eat paper or laundry soap. His thing was swallowing cutlery. Once he downed several knife handles. How did he get the handles off? What drew him to these particular knives? After he ate one, what did it feel like to continue swallowing the others? So many questions. All meals were supervised for his visits. The catheter in your wang makes it feel like you have to pee, but you don't, it does it for you. No, don't just pull it out, you'll shred your bladder and seriously regret it. You're screaming right now because you're trying to pull out your catheter, please stop. No, don't throw your pee bag at me, you'll be arrested for assault. Sincerely, hospital security. A few years ago, I was taking care of a woman from a rural part of our state. She had just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and it wasn't looking good. Her husband was kind of keeping his distance from her. As I was doing something in the corner of the room, he came up to me and whispered, "I can still kiss her, right?" I then had to explain that cancer is indeed not contagious and he won't catch her cancer. It was kind of heartbreaking. Oh man. Number 1. Soda has sugar. I had a diabetic man who didn't realize this. I just don't understand how it was even possible to not know this as a grown adult. He was a completely normal person otherwise, which is why it had me asking, WTF? Number 2. Pouring Lysol on your diabetic foot ulcer won't keep it from getting infected. Number 3. When we said clear liquids only, like Jell-O, water and popsicles, we did not mean that you should convince your mother to blend you some McDonald's burgers and fries so you can drink that through a straw. Number 4. Unless you've already done it at least once before, pushing a baby out of your hoo-ha will neither be a pleasant nor quick experience. Had a couple that had been trying to get pregnant for over a year without success. Turns out they did the deed once and were waiting. Per our professor, she was counseling a couple and was starting to consider doing fertility tests before it came out that the couple were using protection every single time. Probably to all our benefit. Yeah, that's like a non-lethal Darwin award. When you were told not to eat 12 hours prior to surgery, it wasn't a polite suggestion. We had a patient coming in who we told not to eat or drink anything, even water. So he drank Gatorade since we told him he couldn't have water. I worked in an ER and saw this more than once. Last case, parents brought their child in for surgery, let her eat a full breakfast because she was hungry. She vomited aspirated bacon and eggs and ended up in the ICU on a ventilator so they could irrigate all the food out of her lungs. How did the parents react? Were they shocked or was it more like, yeah, we done messed up? They were devastated. They realized they'd made a horrible mistake. It's easy to blame them, but honestly the average person doesn't fully grasp how dangerous surgery actually is. With the county corollary of, no, you can't smoke crystal just before surgery. I bet being an anesthesiologist is a great time. Sir, do you want to wake up halfway through your surgery? Please frickin' listen to me. I shouldn't be surprised, but the amount of people who just don't pay any attention to the medical professionals caring for them is mind-boggling, from the junkies to the idiots who believe they're homeopaths and think they know more after one bullcrap article. An executive came in once complaining of bumps on her tongue. She was worried they might be cancer. I got to write my favorite encounter note thus far in my career. Complaint, bumps on tongue, asymptomatic, exam, taste buds, assessment, taste buds, plan, reassure. I'm a medical student, and earlier this year I was taking a history from a patient during a bedside tutorial where a senior doctor takes a group of us to see a patient together. I was speaking to this man about his symptoms and used the correct word for male organ. Begins with a P, to which he gave me a confused look. I said it again and he still didn't know what I was talking about. I ended up having to ask him if he had any pain in his Johnson while peeing in front of my classmates and my tutor. Keep in mind that this guy was in his 40s. I don't work in a medical profession, but I do work in another place where terrible diseases run rampant and staff spend every waking moment fighting them off. A school. There was nothing more bizarre than explaining germ theory to a teacher. She honestly didn't believe that such a thing could exist. She sincerely believed that sicknesses were caused by negative energy and bad auras, and insisted that it was fundamentally impossible for something as small as a germ to harm something as large as a human body, if something that small could even be alive in the first place. She spouted off something about how a creature that small would be incapable of living for more than a few seconds because energy can only get so small, and a germ, she did finger quotes, could only hold energy to live for 1 or 2 seconds at most. These are the people educating your kids. For everyone asking what she taught, grades 1 to 3. Not exactly the kind of place I'd worry about her voodoo even needing to be brought up, but it shook my faith in her ability to be objective about other things, so I'm still uncertain. I mean, imagine if she was convincing an entire class of 3rd graders that they do not need to wash their hands. Caring for a woman in her 80s, I had to explain to her that you don't pee out of your hoo-ha. There is, in fact, another hole. I'm a veterinarian and I don't understand owners sometimes. I work at a clinic of a vet who's also a private animal nutritionist, so sometimes we do house calls for special cases. Client Bob's dog isn't eating well and he has no clue why. I go over and ask him to show me his feeding routine for his dog. He fills a bowl with kibble and the dog seems super excited to eat. I crap you not, he then goes over to the fridge, takes out the ketchup and drenches the kibble with ketchup. By this point, my jaw is hanging open in shock, and I can see that the dog has suddenly lost its enthusiasm for the meal. I ask Bob politely what he's doing, and he tells me that his entire family has ketchup on every meal. I then spend the next 15 minutes explaining to him that his dog may not like ketchup on its food. Now the dog eats great, and apparently I'm a miracle worker. I work at a vet clinic on weekends, and the amount of junk people feed their pets on a regular basis is astounding. I kid you not, we had a lady board her dog with us for the weekend. She bought toys, treats, bedding, even though we have our own and prefer to use that in case theirs is damaged or lost, but no food. Not a problem, we have food here and we even have tricks to make them eat, like putting some canned ID with their food. She gives our receptionist $40 and says, "Here's the money for his chicken McNuggets, he likes those, feed him 10 pieces a day." The receptionist flat out told this woman no and even bought the vet out to explain why we would not do that at our facility. I totally thought that the story was going to be dog won't eat kibble, owner doesn't understand why, turns out dog has been eating 3-course meals with owner, but he hasn't eaten his food for days. That's actually not too far off from what I see sometimes. Family will feed their dog copious amounts of table scraps and then wonder why he never touches the dog food. And why he has pancreatitis. And now, back to human beings, folks. Sticking the blade of a steak knife in your butt won't cure your constipation. I really wish this was a joke. That just because you take medication that controls your ailments, it doesn't mean you don't have them anymore. I ask plenty of older people if they have any medical history and frequently get "no" as an answer, only to look at their med list and find out that they're on a dozen medications. Why do you take this blood pressure medication? Oh, because I used to have high blood pressure. Nope, not how it works. That yes, guys can be nurses too. I'm a guy and nurse. No, I'm not a doctor. Yes, maybe I should have been a doctor instead. Or maybe a woman should be a doctor instead if she likes it more. Paramedic here. I had to tell a 19-year-old that she needed to change her tampon more than once a month. She was in septic shock, by the way. I'm a guy. Even I know you've got to change that crap out. My sister is an ER doctor in Chicago. She once had to explain to a Mormon couple on their wedding night how to do the deed. The 19-year-old man had taken his 18-year-old bride into the ER, convinced his wife didn't have a hoo-ha. She also had to tell a mother of 4 that giving your children a heavy dose of vodka did not kill the bacteria in their bodies when they got colds. She also had to report that, obviously. She found a very frightened 23-year-old girl who came into the ER very afraid because she had found a growth in her crotch. It was her pleasure button. When my sister was asking her how she had never noticed it before, the girl responded, "My mom told me that if I touched my area, that the devil would get me." The girl had lived for 23 years without ever touching or seeing her own hoo-ha. I guess when she would wipe, she would just blot the outside quickly or something? A female patient came in and told the doctor that she'd been bleeding every month down there, thinking it had something to do with the birth of her daughter. Yeah, I can't emphasize enough the importance of teaching this stuff in schools. 2 things. 1 is to take all the medication even if you feel better at day 3. And 2, you do not give your kid the leftover medication from part 1 when he has the same symptoms a week later. Wanting someone to make you a cup of tea is not a good reason to call an ambulance. For everyone asking, yes, I made the tea. After a half-hour blue light run, might as well. Left to my own devices, I wouldn't have made that tea. I was a student at the time and was told to do so by my mentor. In the UK, social care is part of our remit, so it kind of makes sense. I work in a hospital. I was getting some history from this lady when she told me she was allergic to epinephrine, i.e. adrenaline. You know, the stuff in EpiPens that you give to people when they have an allergic reaction to stop anaphylaxis reaction. So I asked her what reaction she had last time she was given epinephrine, and she told me that it made her heart race, and she couldn't settle down. Had to explain to her that that means it worked.
Lawyers of Reddit. At what point, when working for a defendant, did you realize my client is a monster? A lot of years ago, I used to work as a solicitor's representative. Cases go to Crown Court, barrister deals, and I am there for the paperwork, additional stuff with client, etc. 70-something-year-old man had been in jail for 15 years for an assault on a child. Solicitor and barrister working on getting him released due to him getting clean reports from just about everyone. Guards took him out of jail to a dentist, and as he entered the waiting room, he saw 2 children and ran straight at them. Guards stopped him. 3 weeks later at court, I was the one that sat him down in a room to explain that no, this isn't a hearing to release you. It is so you could be committed to a mental health secure facility for the rest of your life. He didn't take that well. I shed no tears. I am not a lawyer, but a legal assistant. We got a client off of a murder charge. 2 weeks later, she was caught with a similar weapon and situation, except this time, the guy didn't die. Not the client, but my managing partner. The client was a senile 90-year-old man. He wanted to sell land worth a little less than $1 billion to some businessmen. Suffice to say, there were many who wanted to take advantage of the situation. One such person, to my dismay, was our managing partner. The partner wanted to insert a provision that would have effectively funneled about 60% of the proceeds solely to him. You could see how his eyes gleamed at the mere mention of money. The provision, quote, got lost in the revisions. I was doing the revisions. I'm no longer part of that scummy firm. My general psychology professor worked for the state of Arkansas assessing criminals to see if they would qualify as criminally insane. He told us a story one time about a guy who would get glass shards and hide them underneath his skin, presumably to use at a more opportune time. He said his interview with the guy made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. I'm on the other side, but I've got a defendant who went to prison for starving 3 adopted children to the point that they needed weeks of hospitalization, then got out of prison and married a guy with children so that she could start starving them too. Listening to her interview where she attempts to justify what she did to both sets of kids disturbed me more than any of the murder cases I've worked on. We had a client try and enforce a post-employment restraint against a 19-year-old receptionist after she quit and started working for a competitor. The reason? He wanted to, quote, make her life hard because she wouldn't sleep with him, a creepy 57-year-old man. Him trying to sleep with her was the reason she quit. Unsurprisingly, he didn't take our advice to discontinue his claim, and so we ended up sending him elsewhere. Hey, so at this point in recording, I kind of realized that the thread continues into a whole bunch of really sad, depressing, graphic, and violent stories. So I'm just letting you know now, this is where things start getting really bad. Seriously, Viewer discretion is advised. I listened to a 911 call where the victim's throat was slit while on the call by her client. I will never forget her gurgling and sounding like she was dying. Somehow, she ultimately lived through this, saying, "He killed me. He killed me." She tried to sell her baby. I found out during a hearing in front of the judge. Oh, I can share a good story. I had a teacher in high school who was a former lawyer. We always asked him why he gave up his practice to start teaching. He finally caved and explained that his last case was the defense of 3 people. Apparently, there had been a 4th. It was 2 couples who, in the act of a drunken, drugged-out orgy, decided to kill, partially eat, and dismember one of the women. I guess it seemed like a good idea at the time. As a lawyer, he said it was pretty open and shut, but he had to get his clients the best result possible, and he was exposed to all the horrid details, the pictures, and their reasoning. My teacher had such a far-off look when he explained it that we could see it really got to him. The first and last family law case was assigned to me as a first-year associate. My client broke his wife's jaw and said that if they were home in Russia, he would have killed her because he could pay his way out of prison there. My mom is a lawyer. This is the story about how she quit being a public defender. When you're a public defender, you don't get to choose your cases. She got assigned a young man who, with the help of his girlfriend, had gotten a kitten from a, quote, free to a good home ad in the newspaper. Then they brought it home and gave it to their dog as a chew toy. I think they also filmed it. So yeah, she said she needed a shower after every meeting with him, canceled her PD contract after the case concluded. I've done a lot of prison legal aid, and I could tell stories about kitty diddlers that would turn you green, but instead, I'll turn you green a different way. I had a kid, 17, who was mildly cognitively disabled due to brain trauma he sustained at the hands of his birth parents, who ended up with a really wonderful foster care family and thrived. He was a popular kid in school, good athlete, got a girlfriend, and invited her to meet up and be teenagers one night in a corn silo, which I guess is a thing that country kids do. I don't know. This all comes from the pre-sentence investigation report I read before taking his case. But this girl met him at the silo and they were hanging out inside. By his account, they were having a nice time and he was really enjoying himself. Then, for no particular reason, he picked up a 2x4 and bashed her skull in. He then used a combination of very crude farm implements, like shovels and hoes, to chop her body up and bury it in the corn and went home like nothing had happened. Hey, you asked. Had a divorce client, husband and father, who disowned his autistic son, tried to argue that he should get all of his wife's retirement having not worked for 12 years, contacted me during the height of Hurricane Sandy. He was in the Bronx and me in Manhattan, saying he wanted to hold his wife in contempt for not paying him that day while the storm slammed NYC. Told me I was making a huge mistake getting married. My wedding date was November 3rd, 4 days after Sandy, saying that I was going to be miserable and regret it. I could go on. But the worst was when, several months later, since his divorce was taking a long time, he sent death threat letters to myself and my wife saying that he had hired an executor to kill the 2 of us if his divorce wasn't finalized in 60 days. Called the police and they said he left his premises 1 day earlier. I heard nothing from him until February 2014 when he emailed me saying he needed a winter coat from his wife and could I help get it for him. Ironically, the divorce didn't have to be completed because he ended his own life before the judge signed the judgment of divorce. TLDR, miserable guy who wanted to spread his misery and crossed the line when he threatened to kill my wife. Edit. For something a little lighter, this Memorial Day weekend reminds me of not my worst client, but definitely my dumbest. I was representing her on a child custody and child support matter. She was calling me on Memorial Day saying she really needed to speak to me. I called her back and asked if it was urgent since it was Memorial Day and all. She said, "Oh, I didn't think that Jews celebrated Memorial Day, so I thought you were going to be available." I had a client who was accused of domestic violence. Essentially, he threw his girlfriend out of a second-story window. Now, he's got a terrible history, but so do a lot of my clients, and his attitude is a little entitled, also typical. But he also knows the deal and wants a plea deal. So I'm not really prepared when he absolutely refuses the no jail offer from the state. Keep in mind, there were like 5 witnesses. Why? Because they wanted him to pay for her medical bills. Okay, a jerk, but whatever, not the worst. What did it was his counteroffer. I ain't paying that woman's bills. Tell them I'll pay for the window. Prosecutor was not happy. A bit shocked to learn that by throwing someone out of a second-story window in front of 5 witnesses, it was possible for him to get offered no jail time. The first week I started at my current criminal defense firm, I was tasked with cataloging discovery from our client's phone. The phone had multiple, talking around 4,000 videos, photos, and text exchanges with women under 16. Though not all of the girls' ages were confirmed, most, if not all, were under the legal age of consent and many were barely pubescent. Naked and being prostituted over 1 year. He would lure these girls in exchange for drugs. Nothing felt totally bizarre until I came across one video where he was clearly forcing himself upon a literal child who was so high on drugs, not willingly, but rather forced, and choking her in the process. When our firm confronted him, he said he was in love with her and that's why he did it. He would also take these girls to hotels and make them bang with one another while he taped, but nothing beat what I said above. Pretty horrifying stuff for my first week on the job. When this person, an executive, said she was firing any employee who had a serious illness or injury, while promoting fundraisers at a local church for cancer sufferers no less, in part because employees, thinking she'd be sympathetic, would reveal their confidential health info to her. Criminal defense lawyer. I can name a few instances where I was just absolutely disgusted with my client. Caveat, these are mostly years ago when I was taking just any old case. I most practice white collar and federal now. Number 1. I won a DUI case because the government messed up on something right before trial was to begin. My client gives me a hug and completely reeks of alcohol. He was driven to court. I took his keys and called his mother. Number 2. Client who was accused of touching a 12-year-old. He was mid-40s at the time, and I had to shut him down real quick when he tried to tell me how the 12-year-old was coming on to him. Number 3. I represented a woman for a grand theft charge. Left her in my office to get some things copied before she left. After she left, I realized my sunglasses and car keys were stolen. I tracked her down in the lobby and told her I was not going to represent her anymore, and I would call the police if she didn't empty her pockets in front of me and give me my things. Number 4. I had a client who was released after 25 years in prison for murder, and then the same day he beats up his prospective new landlord. He ended up getting another 10 years. He was unrepentant and laughed about how he hit the guy so hard his eyeball popped out. I thought, this guy deserves to be in prison. Took the case to trial anyway and, shocker, lost, and he got 10, the max. Number 5. Client who pretended to be a doctor so he could sell steroids. According to the Gov, he had numerous clients who were made to believe that his steroids would cure their cancer. They paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars and some of them died. I just thought that was pure evil. Defended my client in a lawsuit who defrauded his business partners. Evidence was already overwhelming that my client was liable. Client made matters worse by fabricating evidence and presenting it in court. He got called out on it by his dad's attorney who had the same evidence. It tanked my client's case. My client continued lying to me despite the overwhelming evidence showing he fabricated evidence. He lost big. In addition to a large judgment, he got hit with several felonies for fabricating evidence. Also, the business partners my client screwed over were his dad and brother. My significant other's mother, L, was abusive. She frequently hit her husband, was a compulsive liar, and just generally made her family miserable. When they were settling the divorce, the judge initially deemed a testimony from the kids, my SO and her brother, unnecessary, probably because they were minors at the time, and testifying against one of their parents would be hard on them, to say the least. However, the lawyer representing L was really insistent that they testify. Well, it must have been a shock to the lawyer to suddenly have 2 more witnesses with dozens of accounts of driving under the influence, domestic violence, etc., etc. We figured L must have lied to her lawyer about some significant details because they were completely caught off guard and more than a little angry after the testimony. We like to believe it helped solidify some of the criminal charges placed against her. It was a nice bit of karma after years and years of gaslighting and false rumors that her own lies got her caught. Content warning, this one's pretty gory. Attorney's wife here. I used to help him file away evidence and reports. Came across a file with video. Curiosity got the better of me, especially when husband told me not to watch it. File gives this story. Woman was at a boyfriend's trailer out in the middle of nowhere, got mad at boyfriend, so smacked him in the head with a metal bat and went on her merry way home. Boyfriend is apparently not a pleasant person, and nobody really misses him or looks for him. He is fired from work in absentia. On day 7, boyfriend's neighbor finally stops by, hears hoarse screaming, and calls police. That's where the video came from. Day 7. One of the cops was wearing a camera on his uniform. It shows him and his partner going through the house, finding dog feces all over the floor. Boyfriend's 2 Rottweilers, who were also in the house, went without food for about 6 days before they started eating bits and pieces of him. The camera shows the moment the cop found the body on its side, rolled it over, and he's blinking, eyes open, with most of his face gone. The woman didn't even bother to let the dogs out before she left. I do not help file cases anymore. When I had to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office to view the evidence in this case, there they were, hundreds of images of CP that he had traded, the close-up images of genitals that he had taken and sent around the internet, the pictures of his neighbor's daughters playing in their kiddie pool. Realized he just could not help himself. But he also never once claimed responsibility or showed remorse, so I don't feel too badly for him. Late to the party, but anyways, my first internship in law school was at a matrimonial law firm in a very wealthy area. Think millionaires and billionaires getting divorced. One of the first cases I worked on involved the parents of a victim of a high-profile school shooting. The parents were divorced and had been prior to the death of the child, and were now battling over who would get the victim's compensation fund money and the funds they received from a fundraiser they set up themselves on a GoFundMe-type site. These were incredibly wealthy people fighting over what was literal chump change to them and asking the public to donate to them as if they needed it. They were so clearly exploiting the death of their child for money and to tick off the other parent. It was honestly one of the most disturbing things I have encountered ever. Not a lawyer, but worked for a law firm as an investigator. One of our clients stabbed an ex-lover multiple times over $100. Perp then ran out of the house all bloody. Neighbor and her teenage daughter see him covered in blood and rush inside to see if they can help while they call 911. Victim is still alive. On the 911 call the daughter made, you can hear the mom singing Amazing Grace while she tried to stop the bleeding. You can also hear the victim, with a stab wound in her neck, gurgling on blood while she tries to sing along. The EMTs arrived in under 3 minutes, but it took the police 19 minutes from the call to show up to clear the scene for them. She lived for 17 minutes. I saw the photos of the scene with the body still in place. It looked like a scene straight from Dexter. Oh man, I'm always late when I have a good one. Not a defendant, but a divorce. Client is a late 30s woman, 2 kids, idyllic suburban life with her incredibly lucrative medical profession husband. He caught her cheating. He wanted to patch things up, she decided on a divorce. So far, nothing out of the ordinary, unfortunately. Then I start getting the details. He caught her on his birthday, in their bed, while the kids were downstairs. Dude decided to come home early as a surprise, and his wife was getting banged by a 19-year-old. But wait, there's more. Really fun stuff from the husband. Guy had been treated for gonorrhea twice, and both times he had caught it from his wife. The second kid wasn't his. It was obvious because the child was 100% some race, and the dad was not that race. Bad stuff, right? Well, enter the texts, emails, etc. She was carrying on like a dozen affairs at any given time, spanning years. She would bring them home and tell the kids they were electricians, plumbers, etc. She'd screw other guys within minutes of dropping her kids off at school. I've met some awful people in my time, but this woman straight up told me how much this guy loved her and how much she manipulated the crap out of him. He knew about a lot of the stuff, and each time he found something new, he just tried to win her back. I don't want to go into the details of what happened, but some money that you get, you really don't want. Lifelong criminal defense lawyer here. To be completely honest, it's not about the offense, but about the person. I've had people accused of murder that I really kind of liked and thought well of. I've had people accused of shoplifting who have given me the heebie-jeebies and seem like psychopaths. Speaking purely from a criminal standpoint, having a client who is a monster doesn't matter in terms of your duty to them, but it does make the job less pleasant. My worst clients have been people who are comfortable scamming others of their money. Murder, robbery, and most crimes involve regular people who did or may have done something stupid due to alcohol or situations. But the client you keep an eye out are the ones charged with fraud and the like. Liars, cheats, and all-around shady people, generally speaking. Even the gangs operate on a code of conduct, an old-fashioned war-like code of conduct. Honor and courage are important to them even though they commit crimes. 22 years threatened twice, so not that bad. The real danger? Not in criminal law. It's family law. That's where people get really heated. It's personal. Prosecutor here. Most of us in this profession have the utmost respect for those on the other side of the aisle. Most people really don't know or understand the really messed up stuff that we have to witness and deal with on a daily basis. There's a reason attorneys had the highest percentage of alcoholics by profession. I never thought my client is a monster, but there are a few I've thought were idiots or liars or both. Two of my favorites are a client who instructed me, against my advice, to object to the temporary judge even though we had just discussed it and I had just told the judge we were okay with him. And a client who testified pretty much the exact opposite of what she had told me in our initial meetings and what we had repeatedly discussed. Civil defense here, so maybe not as juicy as some of the criminal defense folks. Some of the work I do is employment defense, particularly sexual/age harassment/discrimination cases. I'm pretty cynical and see a lot of cases where plaintiffs are full of it, particularly in harassment/discrimination cases. In one case, I was defending a company and that company's manager jointly. The manager seemed like a straight-up guy, and I pride myself in being a good judge of character. I was pretty convinced the case was just payback from a disgruntled employee. To my credit, the plaintiff, a 30-year-old female, was a really poor employee by all accounts. Still, it didn't prepare me from what I found during a review of every email the company had stored on their servers. Not only did this guy stick his hand down this woman's shirt without consent, when she threatened to go to HR, he said he'd get her fired and make sure she never got a job again. The lady was a single mother with 3 kids. He also propositioned her for screwing in exchange for a day off. He thought the email had been wiped because the company had a 1-year retention policy. Apparently, some of the company's older emails remained on a server before the policy was put in place because of the migration of the emails from an older outsourced IT company. Not sure if my terminology is right here. I had to substitute out of the case thereafter for conflict reasons, since my 2 clients' interests were no longer aligned. Very disturbing content warning. Even though I've made a throwaway, I'm going to be a bit vague because I still take my ethical duties to former clients seriously and can't breach privilege or the NDA I signed. This is a story from a long time ago, during the summer after my first year of law school while I was briefly working at a well-known criminal defense firm. The client whose case I was working was one of several defendants charged with a conspiracy to commit murder. 3 individuals had committed the murders, and several others had either helped plan it, abducted the victims, came along to watch, or filmed it. In order to see whether our client was one of the individuals present at the scene, I had to watch multiple videos of the murders. I watched multiple people brutally killed in about the worst possible way you can imagine. They were chopped into pieces while they were alive and had their skulls stomped in. It wasn't some grainy security footage. It was HD video taken by bystanders just a few feet away. The videos showed someone's brain squirting out of their head and another person screaming as their hands and arms were hacked off. I also had to listen to the audio to see if our client's voice could be heard. The screams were bad. The laughter was worse. It has stuck with me for years and years, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. Thankfully, my internship at that firm ended a few weeks later at the end of the summer. I never looked up the sentence from the case and have no desire to. In our case, there was no presumption of innocence. The individuals involved had all taken pleas in hope that the prosecutors wouldn't seek the death penalty. The only thing that would change was whether our client would get the death penalty if he was present/filming, or life in prison if we showed that he played a more minimal role. Working in criminal defense meant setting my judgment for people aside so that they could be afforded the rights guaranteed to them by the Constitution. I still did my job to the best of my ability, but I found myself lying awake at night for several weeks in a row, praying to every god I knew that each of them involved would fry in the electric chair, and that someone would laugh at their screams too. After that internship, I never returned to criminal law. I now practice civil law, where I help people recover for wrongs done to them.
People who've outrun the cops. How did you do it? Don't know if this counts, but my friend and I were busted for being 19 and 20 and drinking at a party. Everyone ran, but I hid and they ended up never finding me. I spent an entire 7 hours pretzeling in a woven basket in a closet, wide awake and slowly sobering. The scariest part was when they started searching said closet right after the bust and the cop moved clothes from above my head to reveal my hair and still didn't see me. Good times. Got to love the differences between the US and the UK. Busted for drinking at 19 and 20 in a private residence. I was a baby-faced 15-year-old drinking a pint in a pub. Police officer came in, told me to finish my pint and go home. They let you finish for the greater good. The greater good. The greater good. There were a lot of people and I was faster than 50% of them. Just like my zombie apocalypse plan. The benefit of smoking green herb in a forest and getting caught is that you're in a forest. We just took off. Hard to catch up when there's all kinds of crap to avoid. Personally, I don't rate my survival odds as being very high running through a forest at night while high on green herb, but I'm glad it worked for you. Hanging out at a friend's house when my mum texts me to inform me that my girlfriend is on her way back from college to surprise me. My girlfriend hated the dude I was hanging out with, so I didn't tell her I was there and recently told her I was home. I jump in the car and started flying home on a road that I should definitely not be flying on. As God fated, I pass a cop and I see him hit his brakes in my rear view. I instinctively floor it over the hill, pull into a parking lot, and cut my lights off. Nighttime. Few seconds pass and I see him fly by with his wee-woos on. With no time to spare, I pull back out soon after and I finish flying home. Run inside, jerk my clothes off, lay on the couch, turn on the TV, and she knocks on the door not 5 seconds later. Mission accomplished. Wow, your mum is pretty fantastic for giving you a heads up. Mine would have thrown me under the bus immediately. She's a better wingman than my little brother. When I was younger, I was dating a girl at work. I had faked sick and called in on a Friday to go to a party, and for reasons I no longer remember 16 years after the fact, I didn't tell the girl. So I'm at the party and get a call from my buddy who tells me the girl heard I was sick and was on the way to my house to take care of me and bring soup. I rushed home and my little brother was the only one there, so I tell him, "Look, this girl is going to be here any minute and she thinks I'm sick, so just roll with it, okay?" I heard the doorbell from my room and prepared to put on my sick act. After laying in bed for 20 minutes, I go upstairs to see what's going on. I ask my brother what happened and he said, "I just told her you were sick, so go away." On my way to a concert on a motorcycle, I was kinda racing on another bike up the highway. Went past a state boy at about 100 miles per hour and jumped off the next exit, the correct exit for the concert. Basically, I was able to get past the line of traffic into the event and scoot around a gate that was closed by riding on the footpath. Made my way to an area where there was literally 100+ bikers. Ditched my helmet, removed the jacket and sat on a picnic table while they went around and around looking for me. So not so much outran, but outplayed. Thankfully, they never got close enough to read my plate. I was leaving town heading out into the country on my Triumph, probably cruising at around 80. Pass a sheriff sitting on his little gravel drive. I figured, screw it, immediately downshifted and slammed the throttle open. By the time he hits his lights, I'm doing like 120 and climbing, and he must have figured out it wasn't worth the time because he just shut them back off. Didn't even shift out of park, I don't think. On foot versus a cop car. Ran halfway into a residential block through backyards, aware that they saw which direction I went. Once they were out of sight, I doubled back and ran half into the block in the opposite direction. Sat quietly in a bush. They circled a few times and left that block. I didn't do anything, just ran when a cop car drove by. I was a bored kid. My two buddies and I used to walk to a gas station at night when we were younger because they were 24/7 and sold huge burritos for $1. One of us was strangely afraid of the cops. One night we're walking and he sees a cop driving by and he immediately takes off in a sprint and hops a fence, leaving us awkwardly sitting out there with our burritos. The cop stops and was like, We get our friend to come back and apologize for being weird. Cop tells him he's a strange kid and circles the block a few more times to make sure we get home okay. I remember being like 17 and a group of us went rabbit hunting at night. We would basically ride around the cane fields and shoot rabbits. We would be drinking and stuff, and considering there wasn't crap else to do, it's what we did. So we finish up our hunt and we're exiting the cane fields onto the main highway. It would take us about 10 minutes to get back to my friend's house, and considering there was like 8 of us in a single cab Chevy, a few were riding on the bed of the truck. We jump onto the highway and make it about a mile when a cop turns his lights on. My buddy immediately pulls over and the rest of us are hiding our booze. As soon as the truck stops, one of my friends jumps out the back of the truck, drives into the bayou, crosses it, and takes off running. The thing is that the cop was a friend of ours. He had graduated the year before and recognized the truck, knew what we were doing and wanted to mess with us and see how many we killed. I didn't hear from my buddy that jumped out the back of the truck until next afternoon, when I asked him why he did that. He said it was because he had half a joint in his pocket. This was before pagers or cell phones were a thing, thus the delay in communication. Running into a woods from a bonfire party. Knew previously from running into the woods where the barbed wire fence was and how to get through it. The cop in the dark did not. He was 15 feet behind me, then 100 feet behind me real fast. Wasn't worth giving me the MIP, so he turned back after that. Yee-haw. If he had seen my face, I wouldn't have run. With my car, among everyone else's sitting there, I would have felt way too paranoid driving later. Oh, that sounds rough to be that cop. Maybe he wasn't so much giving up the chase as going to attend to his wounds. We escaped by running. Me and my friends were on the cross-country team. We casually ran 2 miles away. We were drinking in a park. Once we took off, the cops gave chase for about 100 yards and figured, screw it. It wasn't exactly a badass escape, but it was funny as heck. I'm imagining the cops chasing you during a cross-country meet and them getting really exhausted. In a town with a small police force. Hid, then placed an anonymous call tipping the police off that we were back at the scene of the crime, so the officers following us would return there. I've silently dipped out of a group as the cops were fast approaching, but never had to actually outrun them. There's some telltale signs at a party the cops are going to be called within a half hour in all likelihood. When the beer runs out, when the furniture gets lit on fire, potato cannon fired at vehicles, someone dives out of a window to not be seen until the next week, axe-throwing contests and sword fighting while they let the pigs out in a suburban neighborhood down the street from the high school. Senior year of high school, the night before Halloween. My friend dressed as a banana and I dressed as a gorilla. I was going to chase him around campus during school on Halloween, so we decided to go for a quick test run around the neighborhood late at night. We ran around and the banana costume we made was holding up real nicely. We saw a car turning around at a cul-de-sac, so we decided to run past it and see the driver's reaction. About 20 feet away from it, we realized it was a cop car. We were out past curfew, and the cops really do nab you for that here. So we stopped in our tracks and book it for the nearest park. Cop follows. My friend, a cross-country runner, took off ahead of me in his banana suit far into the park, into a trail deep into the neighborhood. I, a chubby dude in a gorilla suit, was wheezing when I got to the park. There were some trees that were about as wide as me, so I take cover behind one of them. The cop shines his searchlight around, and I'm terrified he can see a piece of my suit sticking out from the tree. After what seems like an eternity, the cop finally turns off his light and leaves. Phew. My time to shine. I was 17 and dumb and on my way to a meeting a few towns over. Where I live is so flat that you can watch your dog run away for 3 days, so there are often long stretches of road in an open field. I was turning left onto a 2-lane highway when I saw these 2 cars blow past me, going the direction I was going, at least 90 miles per hour. I said, well, let's make this a convoy. I got up to about 120 to catch them up, and I was about with them when I saw a semi-truck coming in the opposite direction. I thought to myself, how boned would I be if there was a cop driving behind that semi? Sure as God's got sandals, there was a cop driving behind the semi. The first 2 cars passed, and I just saw his lights come on as I passed him. I thought, oh frick. Reckless OP, jail, I'm going to lose my license, I'm screwed. I start slowing down and reach into my wallet for my license when I see a house coming up on my right side on the small side street. There was a house and a 2-car garage off to the side. I slammed on my brakes and took the turn, and I pulled right into this perfect stranger's open garage like I own the place. I get out, shaking because I'm not out of the woods yet. I walk out of the garage and up to the front door of the house and knock. An old lady answers, and I tell her I'm here to work on my car and asked if Jack was home. All BS. She said, no, I'm sorry. I profusely apologized and turned around. Just then, I saw the cop fly past the house in hot pursuit of the other 2 cars. I got back into my car and took the back roads for the rest of the trip. I've beaten them several times. One of those times was in a bad neighborhood. As soon as he swung on me, I pulled into the first driveway and went to the door and knocked. I told the person that answered the door that the cop coming down the road was going to pull me over for speeding, that I had a suspended driver's license and would give them $20 to act like they knew me and to let me in. The cop stopped in front of the house, but the guy let me in. I paid the guy the $20, bull-crapped around for about 20 minutes watching the Wheel of Fortune with him and his wife, then went on my merry way. A relatively small downtown area was coming into town at 45 miles per hour, and the cop was coming the other way, directly at me. I was probably doing about 20 miles per hour over the limit, and he lit my butt up with a radar gun. He passed me, and I saw him turn around in my rearview mirror and flick on the lights. Generally, I would never run, but I was 18 and was 1 speeding ticket away from losing my license on points. I gunned it, got into town, and just weaved through a bunch of side streets until I was pretty sure I lost him. Here's the kicker, I'm pretty sure I lost him, and now I need to get back onto the main highway quickly. I'm sitting at a red light, waiting for the light to turn, and guess who goes right through the intersection in front of me? It was 1 a.m. or so not many cars on the road. My headlights shined right onto his car as he went in front of me, enough that I could see the guy. 18-year-old me crapped a brick. The cop kept going, and I gunned it to get onto the highway. I wonder if the cop had actually just given up on the chase at that point. From some of the other stories, it seems like they don't always pursue these things that rigorously. Storytime. When I was about 14, there was this local store owner who treated the kids like crap, so kids started egging his business. So one night me and my overweight friend decided it's our turn to egg his place. Of course, that was the night he and his friends decided to hide in the store to catch any said eggers, and as soon as I let the first egg fly, they busted out the door after us. I've never seen a fat kid run as fast as my friend. He outran me, and I ran track. I still had a few eggs in my hands, so I started throwing them behind me and I could hear them cursing. I'd like to think that it slowed them down from catching us, but in reality, a bunch of 30-year-old, overweight, beer-drinking stoners weren't going to catch two 14-year-old boys that were scared crapless and running on pure adrenaline. We put the distance between us and them quickly. So here it is, 1 a.m. in a small town, and at this point, we're about 10 blocks from the place we egged. We're on the business side of streets. I want to cross the road so we're in the houses side, where it would be a lot harder for the police to catch us. After hiding in some bushes for a bit and looking to make sure the coast is clear, we make our move. No sooner than we hit the street, we see a cop car like 5 blocks up drive from one street to the next, with a direct line from the police officer's view looking right at us. Suddenly, we heard the screech of his tires as he shot past us, and the sound of the car being revved up in reverse. But by this time, we're hopping back fences and covering blocks and blocks in a matter of minutes. At this point, I'd say we were on the run for about 30 minutes. So we wind up going 10 blocks in basically a C pattern to where we hop fences and cross yards, and we wind up by a house that has a huge weeping willow in front of it, has a direct view of the store we egged, and we can see the police lights, but the tree is so big we can't see past it. But it's the perfect place to hide under, to see what's going on. So we go under it, and we're probably about 7 blocks away, and take a look. I crap you not, there were over a dozen police cars there. This was before the small town I lived in turned to crap, so the police routinely had nothing to do back then. So my friend is like, "Holy crap, look at all these police cars, we're screwed!" Meanwhile, I was saying out loud, "I can't believe there are this many police cars over one frickin' egg." My friend was panicking and I was actually just annoyed that they were making this big a deal out of it. So he says, "Let's just turn ourselves in," and I was like, "No frickin' way." If they were going to make such a big deal, I felt it was the principle that we had to make it back to his house and get away, even if it was just for that night. I said, "All we have to do is go 5 more blocks till we're out of sight of the police, and then cut across to where we're so far away they won't even think we made it that far." He says, "I don't know any of that area. I'm not getting bit by some dog running through backyards." I said, "Mother fricker, we already cut through like 20 backyards, and I'm pretty sure a dog is going to bark before we even get over a fence." I told him he can turn himself in, but I'm making a break for it. He decided to stay with me, so it took us another hour of quietly sneaking through backyards until we were enough distance away that we felt we could cross the main street where all the cops drove to make it back to his place. I considered it a personal victory that we outran half the police force in our town to make it back to his place, even though we turned ourselves in the morning. We left our bikes at the scene of the crime because we were idiots. I still look back at that time and smile. My one and only cop story. In 8th grade, my friend and I were both crammed in one of those electric razor scooters, heading home, and some lady started yelling at us. My friend slowed us down to hear what she was saying. Apparently, she was giving us a heads up that a cop was a block away. We got off the scooter and walked past the cop and went on our way. In conclusion, avoided confrontation altogether. Was with a friend running, suspecting that cops had been called, and we hid in a bush. I turn to my friend and say, "We need to go, but we have to walk." So we step out of the bush and not 20 seconds later, a cop car drives straight past us, didn't even slow down. More often than not, if you act innocent, people will think that you're innocent. I train a lot. I run 5 to 6 days a week, 1 long day, usually 1 interval day, and 3 to 4 easy days. So I signed up for the local police fundraiser 5K, beat all the cops to the finish line. I told them they should add more speed work to their training if they want to catch me next year. I feel like this commenter might have taken the title in a little too abstract an interpretation, but I applaud him nonetheless. Now, settle in for a monster story to finish off the video with. Obligatory, not me, but my brother. The following is absolutely true. Gather round, Redditors, as I regale you with the tale of Bad Luck Mike and one of the times he got away from the man. I take you back to the halcyon days of 1990. Y2K was a decade away, and Prince had been hyping some big party he was planning in the works for 8 years at the time. Supposed to be a hell of a bash. Mike had committed a crime in our small suburb of Fort Worth, Texas. Frankly, the crime doesn't matter at this stage in the tale. Point is, he was on the run. Fortunately, our suburb had lots of creeks and storm drains and gullies crisscrossing through it. Every neighborhood was in the vicinity of a small brook of some sort. Also, fortunately, Mike was in the prime of his life, about 23 years old, 6'4", thin as a rail, with a hollow leg to hold all the beer he could steal on a given night, and the biggest swinging member in the town, whether anyone else knew it or not, and the unmitigated gall to go with it. So Mike was running over the hill and dale and crossing under a dim streetlight here and there on the run to one of his friends' place. But lo, a new problem arose, the baying of hounds in the distance. Johnny Law had called in the dogs. Now Mike started jumping fences, scaring little old ladies, and he finally took to where he would have the greatest chance of losing the fuzz. The creeks. Splashing through murky water all throughout our tiny burg, Mike tried to outfox the dogs until he finally came upon an idea and headed for the police station. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why in the frick would you go to the beehive while the bees are already on the hunt for you? But Mike had a plan. See, in Mike's mind, it made perfect sense to walk right by the cop shop. It's the last place anyone would ever think to look for him, and it had worked before. Mike once evaded arrest for a full week while the Fort Worth cops, in a bit of jurisdictional cooperation, tossed our town to bits searching for him. How? Why, he sat in the FWPD lobby and caught up on his reading, for free, from the library, while they searched for him high and low. I told you, unmitigated gall. So Mike finally came upon the police station and he sat back in a copse of trees making sure the coast was clear. He was covered in mud and muck, all manner of nastiness, and by the sounds of things, the dogs were getting closer. Heart in his throat, there was always the chance he would get seen by someone who was in the right place at the wrong time. Mike walked right by the PD and across the street, to the little laundromat where we washed our clothes every week. At the time, in our town, pretty much all activities stopped around 8 p.m. on the main drag. It was common to leave your front door unlocked and the keys in your car. There wasn't that much crime. So of course, there were no cameras to see Mike kick open the door of the laundromat, close it again behind him, and strip down to his aforementioned swinging eggplant. Using the change in his pockets, he washed and dried his clothes, and he gave himself a decent scrub in the laundromat restroom sink. An hour later, Mike was walking down the street minding his own business. Presently, the flashing lights behind him caused him to look back quizzically and give the universal hand gesture that says, "What did I do?" An incredibly corpulent cop jumped out of the vehicle looking like he'd had a few too many liters of cola, and with his light in Mike's face said, "I caught you." Another universally understood gesture from Mike, palms up, facing away from him, worry and innocence etched up on his face. "Whoa, Ed, what's up? I'm just going over to so-and-so's house. I'm not doing anything." Of course, Mike knew the cop. Mike knew all the cops. All of us did. We'd had them all in our house at some point in their careers, and it was well known that Mike made a cop's career interesting, starting from the age of 15 when he'd become a priest for a few hours in order to pull a truck heist. A tale for another day, gentle Redditors. Ed knew he'd been chasing Mike for the past hour. Mike knew it too, but Mike wasn't about to let Ed get a collar on him. "I've been after your butt for an hour, Mike. I've been chasing you through mud and crap, and goddammit, I got you." Wait, Ed, Mike reasoned. "You've been chasing me for an hour through mud and crap? Ed, I don't have a spot on me. I'm perfectly clean, man." "No, I know it was you, Mike." This goes back and forth for some minutes until Ed's on-duty supervisor pulled up, lights also flashing. He stepped out, looking like an acting double for Dan Aykroyd. "Okay, Mike, why are you giving us a hard time? Ed caught you. Let's go." "Look, Rick," Mike began. "Ed says he's been chasing me through the mud and crap. I'm literally clean." "Rick, I feel for you guys, but whoever it was y'all were chasing, it wasn't me." Having been presented with evidence that Mike was indeed clean and couldn't possibly have been running in creeks and streams for the past hour, Rick and Ed let Mike go. Everyone there knew Mike was guilty. As Mike walked off into the proverbial sunset, Ed and Rick knew they would get him eventually. When they finally did a couple of years later, Mike paid dearly for making them look like fools. Never worry, Mike is alive and well and continuing his anti-hero ways today.
Who is the most hated person in your workplace and why? Current job is a bore on this subject, so we'll go to my last. Tim was the guy everybody hated. He was lucky we all felt bad for his quirks. Every working day, Tim punched in at exactly 8 a.m. and out at 5 p.m. In between those hours, you were lucky if you saw him working. It was because of him we no longer had Secret Santa during the holidays, catered monthly lunches, or holiday bonuses. Secret Santa. Tim was quite frugal, and when I say quite, I mean he was cheap. Every employee in the company voted the dollar amount they wanted to spend on another for the Secret Santa. The average dollar amount came out to $50. Tim's vote was $1. I recognized his crappy handwriting. Everyone, including Tim, agreed to spend around that dollar amount. When it came down to opening presents, it was clear everybody went over that amount. Tim received a pair of tickets to a Dodgers baseball game, plus some Dodgers t-shirts, a hat, and the tickets were face valued at $175 each. His Secret Santa had season tickets and gifted him a pair from his set. When it came down for Tim to give his gift, I wondered who he got. He got his desk buddy. Jessie was the sweetest girl in the office. She worked with everyone and was the most polite, respectful, soft-spoken human I've ever met. When she opened her gift, I wanted to die. He got her lingerie. Not just any lingerie, crotchless, matching bra, and without any tags. Jessie was 5'9" and athletic. Whoever those clothes were for was someone athletically challenged. HR had a heyday with that one. Catered lunch. The last Friday of every month featured catered lunch with a short workday. It always revolved so that things never felt redundant. Mexican, Italian, barbecue, pizza, or Chinese. Tim religiously ate Mexican food. When the chosen Mexican restaurant was catering, Tim was first in line to eat. He would wait around the time clock near the patio doors so that when 1 p.m. hit, his hand was being scanned with 1 foot out the door. When it was any of the other catered meals, he made it known that he was irritated that so-and-so were catering. May 2013, I got to choose what we were having, and I chose Italian, since my birthday was the following day. Tim was seriously mad about having Italian food. Mind you, for the next 2 months, the choices were either Italian or Chinese, so Mexican was nowhere near the table. Eventually, everyone heard a bit of his ramblings, and then it hit the ears of the company chairman. They called the heads of every department in and asked about Tim's feeling and how long this had gone on for. I explained how Tim was a quirky guy, but for some reason only liked Mexican food. Next morning, there was an announcement that we were no longer having company lunches. This meant no more going home at 2 p.m. and no more lunch for the office. Everyone was angry. Holiday bonuses. This is what got the ball rolling for Tim's demise. Our company manufactured steel products and shipped them to different distribution warehouses. Nobody in our office worked in sales, so nobody had commission-based pay. Every year, before our 2-week holiday vacation, we received our last checks for the year and a bonus. The bonus was a percentage of the profits divided up between all employees. It was great. Who doesn't like more money right before the holiday season? Tim, that's who. This particular year had been a bad one for us. Profits were down 10% due to one of our distributors filing for bankruptcy. So our bonuses were not as big as before, but they still equated to a paycheck's value. Everyone, other than Tim, was ecstatic that they were still receiving bonuses. When Tim opened his check, heck broke loose. I've never seen someone so angry about a bonus check in my life. First, he goes around asking everyone how much they received. We all received the same amount, but nobody wanted to show him their check. Then he tries to talk to his desk mates about receiving less than last year, and this is where it goes downhill. Everyone he asks tells him that they received more than last year's amount. You can see where this is going now. After everyone's gone for the day and a few of us stay to clean up the holiday party mess, Tim rushes the company owner and lays into him on why he received a lower bonus, that he feels undervalued, he should be asking for a raise. We can hear him yell through a closed window to the outside. The holidays pass, and Tim is as happy as ever. All department heads get called into what seemed like a normal Monday after the holiday meeting, and we're told the yearly bonus structure will no longer continue at our branch. Everybody knew why. A month later, Jessie finally got him fired after bringing light to several inappropriate harassment instances revolving around Tim. Last I heard, he moved to Kansas to live closer to his family. Edit. Wow, this really took off with a few people. Before the new year, I was already in exit plan mode after an acceptance at a larger company. I made it clear with the owners months beforehand so they weren't shocked. March 2014, I officially left, which was about a month after Tim. Many of my coworkers were older than me and could basically be my parents if you looked at the ages, so I didn't have an outside work relationship with anyone. However, I Facebook messaged an old coworker who's still there to get some updates for you guys. I'll update once I have new information. Update. So looks like everything is back to normal and the company chairman reinstated all the perks. Right after Tim was fired, the department heads had a meeting with the chairman and concluded Tim was the issue to all of this. The chairman agreed to reinstate the bonus structure, and now when Mexican food is ordered, there are always leftovers to take home. A bonus story. The coworker I talked to was called by a competing company as a reference for Tim a few years back. It just so happened that he answered the phone and worked the appropriate department. After a few weeks, the hiring agent called him back thanking him for his answers and that Tim didn't make it through the probationary period. He was the worst candidate they had that was the most qualified on paper. He didn't believe Tim lasted all the years we had him. In the 2 weeks he was there, he managed to tick off every coworker there. Amazing Tim. Won't name names in case this comes back to me, but he's a level 3 engineer who does absolutely nothing all day. He'll book a conference room and sit in the dark for hours. He'll sit at his desk and do actually nothing except exist. But his team, which he did not assemble and which he does not actually lead, is good enough to make him look good, so he keeps getting more responsibility. I work in a small chiropractic clinic. 3 chiropractors, 4 receptionists, 2 per shift. One of the receptionists literally does nothing but check patients in. We are supposed to work on billing and other tasks to do with insurance. She always leaves her Facebook logged in into the communal computers, so I like a bunch of dank meme Facebook pages for her. The woman who would use money from our pooled tip jar to fix her pricing mistakes, literally stealing money from her coworkers to cover her butt. We all hated her. My mom works in a coffee shop and the manager will regularly take staff tips to cover any till discrepancies. Not only illegal, but a total jerk move, because the tips are pooled monthly and divided so it affects staff who weren't even in at the time. Edit. I was incorrect. This is totally legal. It's still a jerk move. If a national chain can't swallow a loss of £2 when the markup on a cup of coffee is almost twice that and punishes the staff, well, screw them. Once the manager accidentally ordered 2 cakes. Only one was sold and the other went out of date. He refused to have it on his wastage, denied making the error, and took £75 out of the staff tips for that 1 cake alone because that was the resale cost. Makes me heave. My boss's wife has been given a position of authority over my department, despite having no experience or expertise in the area. But the worst part is, she is an older lady and by all accounts seems to be suffering from dementia/Alzheimer's. Every single email you send her or email chain she's included on, she will respond without having any understanding of what was written to her. So then you have to spend the time explaining the whole content of the chain or email to her. We have to attend meetings with her where she will spend a lot of time rambling about things that have nothing to do with our work. We have to remind her or re-explain things that we talked about at the last meeting that are relevant because she doesn't remember or understand. Then the whole thing happens all over again in the next interaction with her, like it's Groundhog Day for her. We have this goober of a guy who works probably 1 full day a week. I actually get surprised if I don't have an email in my inbox the morning of saying he won't be in. Worst of all though, he sits nearest to the bathroom and makes comments like, "Wow, you were in there a long time. Must have been in number 2, when people come out. Worked for an attorney who was almost never in the office. And I'm not talking like she was in court or meeting clients outside the office. She just wouldn't show up. She missed calls and appointments all the time, but I get written up for missing a few days because my babies got sick and then I got sick. She was a jerk for other reasons too, but she was hypocritical on top of it. There was a time she didn't come in for 2 weeks and she argued with me about it and I asked her to show me on the calendar when she came in. She couldn't. She did not remain a partner for very long. We have a dude who rolls in at 10 and leaves at 2, 3 or 4 days each week. He has a different supervisor than us that works in another office even though he's on our team. So infuriating. We've talked to our boss so many times about him, but she can't do anything. Screw him. Edit. Many people don't like me for this, claiming that he gets plenty of work done in his time I see him. I'd like to say that's not true. He pawns off hours of work per week on us. That's why it's a problem. George the Joiner. Minimal number of fingers, bad personal hygiene, unintelligibly thick accent. This is not a man you want operating a forklift, operating machinery, or driving. If he carries something through the workshop, it's a safe bet that he will utterly destroy something with his own brand of half-blind ignorance. But what a man. Mysterious and enigmatic. Who is he? Where did he come from? When will he go back? Find out next time on Dragon Ball Z! Far and away, the most hated person in my carpentry shop is the deaf guy. I've only been working there a year, and everyone thinks he is the most vindictive, hateful, selfish, paranoid jerkwad to walk the earth. He's easily the hardest worker there. I can tell you with confidence that he has generated the most money for the company of anyone there. He absolutely owns his portion of the shop. He has it down like clockwork and doesn't waste a second. All that being said, he throws an absolute rabid fit whenever anything out of routine happens, and he won't look anyone in the eye, and he calls everyone lazy jerkwads. After a month of working there, I started to learn American Sign Language. I learned a few things at home and would say anything that I could to him. Happy Monday, how are you, etc. I learned how to ask about words, how to spell things, how to sign numbers. Pretty soon he's teaching me a word a day. Then it speeds up to 3 to 5 words a day. Fast forward a year, and we talk constantly. What I learned is that he gets mad because he's been passed up for promotions because he's deaf. People don't tell him overtime is available when it's what he wants. He sees people coming in late and still taking breaks, and he never breaks those rules. He gets mad that no one ever tells him about new machines being bought or new jobs coming in or the gossip. I unknowingly became his liaison. He stopped fighting with people. He's able to get all of the jokes we tell at lunch because I can translate. Other people are learning sign language as time goes on too. What I don't get is why no one ever gave him the benefit of the doubt. It would suck to be deaf and never know what was going on. Some people have worked with him for 15 years, and no one has ever learned any ASL. He thanked me recently for being a good friend. He said things are a lot better now. Edit, one guy in the shop did learn some sign language, all of the insults and swear words. Not working there anymore, but I had one coworker, call him Roy, who was a POS. We worked in IT support, and Roy was considered the quote-unquote expert for a certain system our team managed. He was supposed to train me, but he only taught me the very basic stuff. He never told me about the plethora of problems that can occur with the system. When alerts did happen, which I had no idea what they were or how to respond to, he would chastise me and throw me under the bus. There was another incident where the boss didn't trust him to come in for an overtime shift, so I was asked to come in at a certain time to cover. I called Roy first thing in the morning and asked if he would come in. He said he would, so I went in at my normal time. Roy doesn't show, and I'm forced to work 10 hours that day to cover his lazy butt. Surprisingly, the incident didn't get him fired, but he did proudly announce he found himself a new job a month later. The new job rescinded their offer, and he went into survival mode. He deliberately continued to train me poorly to make himself, quote, unreplaceable, but the company refused to let him stay, and that was the end of it. Coworker who talks way too dang much. I can make conversation with my coworkers, but we all have a sense of when it's appropriate. She's the kind of person who bombards me with chatter as soon as I walk in, before I've even taken off my jacket. She tries to make conversation out of everything, to the point where it gets really annoying because it happens so frequently. I was really swamped with stuff the other day, and she stopped me just to point out that a customer's last name was one letter different from her own maiden name. Isn't it amazing? No, Carol, it's not. S constantly eats throughout the day, but to do this, he must take several trips to the canteen to acquire food. But on the way to the canteen, it starts with at least a 20-minute cigarette break. Complains heavily if anyone asks him to do anything, as he is always too busy. We have flexi-time at work, so he gets in early, and on the odd time I have turned up early, the office lights are always off. Apparently prefers working in the dark. Becomes deeply offended at any change in the office, and the temperature must be kept cold as he can't work if it's too warm. Can't stand the coffee addicts in the office as they need caffeine but drink several bottles of Coca-Cola every day. I've been in the office now for nearly 2 years, still yet to work out what he actually does. He smells, he's sweaty, and when he sneezes, he wipes his nose with his hand and then he cleans it off on the desk. I hate S, and so do the rest of us. Edit, I have no problem with working in the dark, but as an IT department, I feel it is better to do work with eyes open and the PC on, and not having the office door locked. I don't mind wearing my coat all year round in the office, gloves in winter, but I do feel a compromise could be met. I'm not asking for a sauna. Our most hated person is a troll who survives off cigarettes, Diet Pepsi, and the souls she drains, mine included. Some of her greatest hits, telling me I am not getting any younger, therefore my babies would be, quote, our word, her word, not mine, telling a delightful tale of how she once snuck in pork into a Muslim's diet, going on about her husband's pension and how she doesn't have to work, she just works for the fun of it. Yet she bums smokes and bus fare off people half her age. She lives to get anyone into trouble, yet she's incompetent herself, and when she's called on it, she says, to err is human. Every week she threatens to quit, but nowhere would have her. To err is human, but to be a piece of garbage is divine. You know those rows of staples you put in a stapler? He takes 2 of those, faces them against each other, and rubs them between his fingers all day. It may be worse than nails on a chalkboard, and he will not stop for everyone. Let me tell those of you who scrolled down this far about Supervisor Chef Bob. We all hated Bob. Bob wasn't a team player, you see. When we were swamped, everyone would skip breaks except for Bob. We would all help whoever was falling behind except Bob. Bob did his own thing and left you to the wolves. Bob always pointed out what you did wrong or what you did lazily. Eventually, Bob started helping me a little when I would fall behind. I thanked him once for grilling a steak for one of my orders, and I made the mistake of telling him that steaks are my weak spot. I had trouble overcooking them. For weeks after that, he arranged it so I cooked every freaking steak. Time passes and I became, not to brag, one of the competent employees. I noticed one night that Bob was jumping in to help me whenever I fell behind. He would even ask what I wanted him to cover. Once I was working with him and I noticed Brenda was falling behind. Brenda is always falling behind. I was clear for a minute and told Bob that I was going to help Brenda for a minute. Bob said no. Brenda has to learn how to do her job. She won't learn if we always do it for her. And I saw Bob in a whole new light. He wasn't lazy. He just wanted us all to know our jobs. Once he knew anyone could handle anything, then he was quick to help out. He was, he admitted to me once, very bad at remembering who had taken breaks. He had no problem covering for a break. We just had to ask him instead of waiting forever for him to tell us to go. Now, Bob is gone. I was genuinely sad to see him go. Standards have fallen, and Brenda is still incapable of doing her job. A girl recently promoted to be a, quote, interim education director position, but she fails to leave out the interim part when introducing herself. She brings her untrained, disobedient dog to work, wears highly inappropriate clothing to a job working with kids, tells people they have to respect her because she's a director, leaves her desk a mess, makes every story about her, willfully ignores safety protocols if she doesn't have time for them, had fatherly nicknames for the old boss, sat on the boss's lap at the Christmas party kissing him on the cheek, and smiles like Ted Cruz. Why was that the part that got me? He is no longer working with us, but he is still legendary to this day. Since he is most likely on Reddit, I will refer to him as Magoo. Magoo and I both started at the same time in a science-based company, but in different departments. He looked really good on paper, well qualified, and interviewed fairly well, from what I was told. I sat next to him and we began chatting. It became pretty apparent that something was off on him. He would giggle to himself during the conversation and immediately began one-upping me in the conversation, saying how he had something better or knew more about what we were talking about. Not a big deal. I work with scientists and engineers, being one myself, and odd personalities are the norm. Within a day or two, I knew that I was not going to enjoy my time with Magoo. Our office has a tradition of getting bagels and cream cheese every Friday as a sort of reward for a long week. I get in at 8:30, Magoo is already munching happily on a loaded bagel and giggling to himself. Not a big deal either. I get my bagel, start working, Redditing, and head to the bathroom an hour later. I can see as I'm walking that Magoo is eating another bagel. Not cool, but I've gotten two myself from time to time if there are plenty left. 15 minutes later, I see Magoo eating another bagel and trying to sneak off with it. I confront him and tell him you can't eat 3 bagels before some people have had one. He brushes it off and tries to pretend like he didn't know he had done it. This guy is in his 30s, by the way. Magoo's interests were wide and varied. Think being a part of esoteric clubs, makes his own gaming computers and brags about it. The worst part of being around him is that he takes over every conversation he is in, and he is in every conversation. He will literally walk up to a group of people, no matter what they are talking about, laughing like he heard something funny, and then interject with how he knows more about it or is an expert at it. It got to the point that we would avoid him at all costs, or just leaving when he came around. Didn't matter to Magoo, he would follow you and talk about his knowledge anyway. Magoo is also a closed-eye talker. You know who I'm talking about. The kind of person who will smugly assume he knows more about what you are saying and will close his eyes and turn his head away in an exasperated measure of, I can't believe I have to explain this, manner. He began to get on everyone's nerves, but began getting bolder with his interjections. He interrupted the CEO of our company during an important meeting to correct him on a detail that didn't matter. The balls on this guy. He also began changing login details, since he knew a good bit on computers, for shared machines for sequencing and changing protocols without getting approval. He ordered over $10,000 in materials for an experiment that wasn't authorized to answer something he had been wondering about, not even related to what we were doing. The last straw is when he started insulting people if they disagreed with him, including his boss. At this point, Most people wouldn't even respond to him when he spoke to them, and most people just left when he came around, even in mid-sentence. How he lasted 3 months is beyond me, but the day he was fired, we were told to stay out of the offices in case he did anything drastic. After he was gone, he asked his boss for a reference. I still like to check up on Magoo every now and again. He is still unemployed and probably has no idea why. Edit, Magoo, if you are reading this, I hope that you are doing well. Please know that I tried hard to like you, but you need to let other people say things, even if they are wrong, without telling them what you know. I also hope that you find a job. No person deserves to feel unwanted or that they don't deserve success. Hopefully you can reevaluate how you treat people and have a few slices of humble pie. You can have some cool hobbies, even if you tell me about them with your eyes closed.
Gynecologists and OBs. What is the most mind-blowing thing a husband or boyfriend has said? Story from my internship. Checked a woman who was not progressing in labor and thought, that's not a head. Sure enough, the baby was breech. She was a very tiny woman, and this was a large baby, so it was pretty clear that she would need a C-section. She was a recent immigrant from a small third-world country, didn't have a partner with her, and spoke absolutely no English. Unfortunately, nobody in the unit spoke her language. I tried my best to mime and explain what was happening and what we were recommending. She nodded yes, but I had a strong sense she didn't understand the explanation. We sent somebody down to housekeeping and the cafeteria, hoping we could find any hospital staff who could translate. Fortunately, we found someone able to translate. It turns out that she understood the baby was breech, but that she thought we would have to literally cut her open and kill her in order to save the baby. Her relief and joy when she finally understood what the plan was something I won't forget. The staff member from housekeeping was wonderful and stayed to support her until she went into the OR. My mum was a general practitioner. She once had a 15-year-old girl come in who had a pregnancy test show positive, but was adamant that she couldn't be pregnant. My mum confirmed the pregnancy, but the girl still refused to believe it was true. She went on to explain to my mum it was impossible for her to get pregnant because her boyfriend had told her that if she laid completely still during the deed, then she wasn't technically doing it and couldn't get pregnant. I was kind of refraining from commenting on any of these stories until I read this crap. This is the kind of loophole you use with the church, not with your doctor, and I can't stop laughing. I worked in a pharmacy and we noticed that a 16-year-old girl was coming back in to pick up her birth control exactly 2 weeks early every month. This was immediately flagged as strange because BC comes in a convenient package that makes it easy to keep track of the daily dose and birth control. It's not really a drug that people hustle to try to get as many pills as they can. Like Xanax, say. After a few months of this, the pharmacist confronted her and learned that every day she took her pill and her boyfriend did too. After Googling what happens when men take birth control, I'm morbidly curious as to how many months this happened for, because the boyfriend in question was probably undergoing some interesting changes as a result. When my wife was delivering our third child, a VBAC, I asked the doctor as a joke, "Can I be the one who chews the umbilical cord in half?" And he looked at me with a distant look and said, "Yeah, I guess." After several complications and several hours, a beautiful girl was in the world and the doctor said, "Okay, Daddy, get down on the floor and chew this cord in two if you're ready." Yeah, I didn't do it. I'm a nurse and helped deliver this girl's first baby. I was still in school at the time. She was like 19, I think. The father, who was obviously much older, was also in the room. After the baby was born, everyone was all excited and emotional, except for the father, who was just like, and shrugged it off. I worked in a diagnostic center. The gynecologist refers a patient for a hoo-ha ultrasound to find out why she's having fertility issues. The techie inserts the probe, woman flinches in pain, the tech asks if it hurts during adult fun times. The woman explains her husband doesn't insert it into the hoo-ha. No, here, while pointing to her belly button. The tech came out red-faced. She had to call the doctor and explain why the patient was having trouble getting pregnant. This happened twice at this clinic. Twice. ER nurse here had a 19-year-old woman come in for abdominal pain. She had 2 kids and was pregnant again. She said she was not happy to be pregnant again, but she didn't want to break up with her boyfriend. I thought the boyfriend may have been abusive or not letting her use birth control or something, so I closed the door and asked her some questions. Turns out she didn't know that banging caused babies. Her life skills class consisted of get boyfriend/married and the babies arrive, with no other details, so she thought once you had a boyfriend, babies were automatic and doing the deed was just a fun thing to do. We had a long talk. I'm not an OB, but work at an L&D hospital. In a note for our patient, there was one from a previous office visit that said, "Chief complaint, husband concerned about wife's weight gain during pregnancy. She was actually under the weight she needed to be at during that time." Seeing mum back in the office for her 2-week follow-up after delivery to remove stitches. She had a tear that needed repair, only to find out that the stitches were gone. Turns out hubby took them out because they were bothering him when they were getting intimate. My mother is an OB-GYN. She did a manual hoo-ha exam for a woman, and the husband asked her with an angry tone of voice if there was any other way of doing the exam besides her using her fingers, because he didn't like her putting fingers in his wife. Not an OB, but when I was in med school, I was seeing a pregnant teen who was convinced she couldn't be pregnant. I asked if she was getting intimate with anyone, and she said yes. I asked if she used any kind of contraception, and she said no. However, she said that her boyfriend told her he couldn't get pregnant because he got kicked in the balls. A lot. Not an OB, but I work in an ER, and we had a 22-year-old woman come in a while back. I asked her what she was there for, and she said, "I found a hole." Like an abscess? "I found a hole." Okay, is it a wound? Does it hurt? "No, it's just a hole. It's a black hole." I 100% didn't understand what she was talking about and knew that I wouldn't get any more info from her at the check-in desk, so I gave her the bracelet and sent her to the triage nurse who had the same conversation with her. She didn't specify anything beyond, "Look, it's just a hole." It was her hoo-ha. I can't… What? 22? How? How did this person get this far? There are so many things that should have happened in her life to enlighten her as to the nature of her anatomy. My goodness. Growing up, my mother was very strict and religious, and girls were forbidden from looking or talking about down there. Could be a similar situation? I was working with a girl who hadn't been married very long, and who hadn't had a period since the one right before her wedding. She had told her older sister, and she had told her she needed to find out if she was pregnant. So she went to the doc, and it was confirmed that she was. She pulls me in the back room so no one else can hear, and she tells me, and I tell her congratulations. She says she has a question for me. She's peeing just fine now, but how will she pee when the baby gets bigger? Won't it block the urine? We worked in a library. I went right out to the stacks and got her a book on anatomy and another on pregnancy. I found the pages on the genitourinary system, and we sat in the break room while I read the one for females with her and explained it like it was a storybook. I was so furious that no one had told her a damned thing. On my OB rotation, husband said, "Holy crap," as the baby crowned, vagaled, passed out, and hit his head on the bedside table on his way down, and had to be admitted to the same hospital his wife was having the baby at. She ended up getting discharged before he did. I definitely gave a story to the nurse who was taking care of my wife and I after our second kid. Having been going through labor all day, only being on liquids, and not giving birth till almost 9 at night. We were relaxing, relative term, with the nurse holding the baby when I turned to ask the nurse a question. She pauses, turns away, turns back to me and responds with, "Not anytime soon." Disappointed, I tried to ask for more specifics, because I'd casually asked, "When can my wife have snacks?" And that was a pretty nondescript answer for someone who hadn't eaten in 12 hours. Turns out she thought I was asking when my wife and I can have adult fun times together again. After a good laugh, the correct answer was a couple of hours. I can't imagine what was going through her head before the clarification. Work in IM, but a patient's partner not wanting us to reveal an HIV diagnosis to a patient was definitely a low point for me, though where I work it's probably a stretch to even call that surprising. Back in my ER days, a young teenage patient came in with pregnancy-type symptoms. Of course, pregnancy test was positive, and appeared utterly shocked she was pregnant. I asked her if she was intimate with a partner. Yes. Do you use protection? No. Because? No. She still seemed surprised this had happened to her. Mom is an OB-GYN. She called a patient over to tell us she was HIV positive. The patient said, "I knew it," to which my mom asked how and why. Turns out the husband had been HIV positive for years, and they'd decided never to speak about it and have unprotected fun times for 5 years. This is what it costs to shirk responsibility and look the other way. In other words, idiot tax. Last month, a dad asked one of our OBs for an extra stitch during his wife's repair after delivery. Her immediate response was, "Exactly how small do you need it to be, sir?" Fricking legend on our unit now. Spread this so it can become the standard response to this all-too-common statement. I'm not an OB or GYN, however I am a flight medic who has delivered 3 babies. I'll never forget any of them. The second baby I delivered was about 5 weeks early, roadside, in East Jesus nowhere. The family had gone camping in the desert and Mum went into labor. By the time we arrived, there was no turning back and baby's head was visible. Mum was sort of squatting with her forearms on the middle row of seats in a van and her booty was aimed out the door. She was clothed in a loose dress. Just as she was pushing the head out, Dad said, Wait, we might get blood on the floor. Mum rounded on him with the biggest death glare and said, Frick your mum's van. That became a unit motto. Yeah, frick your mum's van, silly dude. Your wife is delivering your baby. If your mum asks you to reupholster her vehicle hot on the heels of this, she's officially a few Fruit Loops short of a bowl. Sister is a nurse in the mum/baby unit who will also work in labor and delivery. One dad asked for a C-section so her hoo-ha wouldn't be ruined. Another dad asking for her to be stitched up extra tight after the delivery. Another dad that couldn't seem to keep his clothes on during their entire stay. The nurses had to have multiple conversations with him to keep his clothes on. He just kept stripping and walking around, like he'd go out to the coffee station in the hall with only his tighty-whities on, and he'd be buck nude in the hospital room. We had to ask him to wear pants and a shirt when in the hall, and at minimum pants in the hospital room. No, he wasn't even trying to do the deed with her. Not a physician, but I do work in obstetrics. We had a code OB called on the overhead, which means a delivery is happening elsewhere in the hospital, and the team needs to get their stat. A woman's husband was worried about getting a parking ticket, so figured he would park in one of the massive parking garages and then walk up to the door as she's literally giving birth. They obviously didn't make it, and she delivered in the car. They were extremely religious, and to prevent her body from being exposed to what could potentially be a male doctor, they kept her pants on the whole time. Baby, placenta, and all were just chilling in this woman's pants. It was horrifying. Baby and mum were okay in the end. Dad is a 30-plus year OB and gynecologist, now retired. He tells a story of a hyper-religious couple, Muslim, who came in about difficulty getting pregnant. He examined the woman alone and discovered that she was actually an intersex person. Male gonads, undistended, no uterus, normal hoo-ha. The woman was mortified to learn this at 18. She feared her husband would be violent, believing he had been being gay by doing the deed with her. My dad gave her the option to call the police or ask for help. He and the nurses gave her phone numbers for counseling and offered discretion when talking to the spouse. She declined everything and asked that they tell the husband together. The man was super upset and they eventually left the office, both in tears. Dad never saw her again and wonders what happened. Multiple people are asking the question, how did she not recognize something was wrong when she missed her period for multiple years? I'd asked this question myself to my dad as well. The answer, if I recall correctly, was that she did experience mild and intermittent menstruation-like symptoms, cramps, bleeding, etc., but they were very far apart and in hindsight completely unrelated to actual menstruation. She was from a rural community and never sought medical attention due to, who knows, money, fear, and the fact that she was otherwise completely healthy, I presume. I remember him saying that the marriage was arranged, and I'm sure her side of the fam were probably apprehensive about fertility issues. These are tricky situations. My grandpa was a surgeon, private practice, and in the army. Toward the end of his life, we discussed some of the crazy things he did and saw. He told me he operated on a man with 2 tumors in his abdomen. Turned out to be fully developed ovaries. He had fully functioning gonads, no hoo-ha or tubes, etc. Grandpa told him the tumors were successfully removed. The human body is a crazy thing. Back in my OB rotation in med school, we had a pregnant woman who was super morbidly obese with a BMI in the 70s. During her prenatal visit, the resident was asking about her pregnancy history, past difficulty with fertility and conception, problems with the pregnancy so far, etc. Pretty standard stuff as I understand at the time. Husband then chimed in about the conception. Turns out they had no trouble conceiving. He then went into detail about how the conception went and blew my little inexperienced mind. Basically, the wife's mother and sister had to help with the conception by holding the wife's thighs out of the way enough so that he could get in to do the job. I still don't have words. Not anything a husband or boyfriend said, but still an interesting story. I once took care of a patient who had a baby as a virgin. She was a very religious woman who was saving her virginity for marriage. She told me she never met the right man and she was ready to have the baby as she was getting older. She was in her early 40s, so she had the IVF done and had a baby while also being a virgin. Not an OB-GYN, but a med student. In one of my rotations, I had an encounter with a father who wanted us to make his wife only reproduce male children by some drugs or procedure. Our head used to tell us that I can tell if it's a boy or girl by only seeing the expressions of the fathers and relatives in the clinical rounds. You're allowed to guess, my country. I missed 2 minutes ago when I didn't know any of this. Me too, anonymous Reddit user, me too. Although I'm glad to say that none of these medical facts have been a revelation to me, there have been some stories that have been uncomfortable for yours truly to read out loud. My dad is a doctor and his friend was an OB-GYN and was telling my dad a time when a couple came into his office and they were having difficulty having a child. They were trying for over a year to have a child, but the wife never got pregnant. Found out that the man and the woman came up in a very strict upbringing and the man was never putting his eggplant inside of her. He was basically rubbing his eggplant on top of her hoo-ha and would splooge across her belly. Then he would take his finger and smear his semen all over the top of her hoo-ha. My dad's friend had to explain how to do the deed to both of them and tell them what to do and how to do it. It was an awkward conversation. I just kept thinking, did they not ever watch adult flicks or have that talk with their parents? Have they never even seen stuff related to doing the deed ever? It was just a crazy story, and I wonder if they ever figured it out and actually eventually had kids or not. My friend told me that her OB-GYN friend told her that apparently a significant number of people try to get pregnant by doing it in the butt. Proper education on these things matters, people. Years ago, I knew a woman that wanted to get pregnant, but that wasn't happening. She told me that one problem was her husband insisting on turning her around at the end and finishing in her butt. Now, she knew that wasn't good for conception, but he didn't, and she couldn't explain it to him in a way that worked. Perhaps I'm just being naive, but things like this make me wonder if he really knew or was playing dumb with his wife so he didn't have to have kids. My doctor told me a story about a baby he delivered. It was the couple's 6th, and they were very observant Orthodox Jews, so when she called at 11 p.m. on Shabbat that labor had started, the husband couldn't drive them to the hospital himself. Although the doctor understood, he tried to help them understand how emergent the situation was because the delivery was going to be so fast. The doctor races to the hospital and waits. He waits 30 minutes. An hour. He's pacing the drop-off. Finally, 90 minutes later, a taxi screeches into the parking lot at 2 a.m. The doctor opens her door to see a baby crowning and the woman yelling and the driver yelling. The husband throws open his door and just sprints off into the parking lot yelling, does a full loop while the baby is born, and runs up as the nurses are wrapping the baby and getting mum and baby into a wheelchair. The doctor said, "What happened? Where did you go?" The dad, I just didn't know what to do." The poor guy was so hopped up on adrenaline that he just took off. Not a mind-blowing thing that was said, but still kind of funny. When I was in medical school, I did my OB rotation on high-risk areas. Medical students were generally scared of these areas, so I was the only student with an awesome attending physician and got to do a lot. We called the attending on this service a random thought generator. If he thought something, he would say or act on it. We had one student that showed up on our service in active labor. She had had a very uneventful pregnancy and couldn't figure out why she was on our service, but hey, we'll take a normal patient. She arrived with perfect makeup, perfect hair, and she had the perfect epidural and was in no pain or distress. The attending looked at me and said that I'd be doing this delivery. Okay, I thought, no problem. Then he looked at the father and said, "No, you'll deliver this one." The father got wide-eyed and the mother started laughing. "He's an air traffic controller. I've never seen him panic before." The nurse took him to the sink, gave him a scrub brush, and had him start washing his hands. We turned back to the mum. "Okay, push. 1, 2, 3, 10. Relax." We looked at the dad and he's still washing that same finger he started with. Okay, that's good enough. A delivery is by no means sterile. Put this and this and this on. Our attending didn't put women in stirrups, but would instead deliver straight onto the bed. He sat the dad on the bed with him on one side and me on the other, and the dad delivered his own healthy child. My mum taught labor and delivery. If the baby won't fit, it's too late for a C-section, so you break up the baby's shoulder so it can fit through. One of her students asked why they don't break the mum's hip instead. Not a doctor, but pregnant. I told my boyfriend we should make and freeze 1 to 2 months of meals before the birth, because we'd be too tired to cook. He looked at me knowingly and said, "Ah yes, like pureed fruits and vegetables, so we don't have to mash them ourselves." He literally thought you feed the baby food from day one. We're in our 30s, college-educated, he has a huge, close extended family with lots of babies, and he knows I'm going to breastfeed. I guess he thought you do them both from day one? My ex-boyfriend is an OB-GYN. He got annoyed with me when I was having cramps and said because he was an OB-GYN, he knew exactly what pain felt like and told me to get over it. Should have seen that as the first of many red flags. Obligatory, not an OB-GYN, but an operating room nurse. One gynecologist told us once about their gynecologist in training. We all knew him. He was a young, friendly, and good guy to work with. He was already married, father of 2 kids at the age of 25. This guy only had one negative aspect, and it was affecting his work dearly. He was extremely religious. This doesn't have to be negative, but his decision-making was based on his religion, and he often refused to offer contraceptives to his female patients, and he was reserved talking and explaining contraception methods to couples. It was against his religion. Eventually word got around with his superiors and they had to sit him down, explaining with him it's against the law to withhold any form of help and information. I was a receptionist and this woman came in crying. Her husband was behind her and she said, "Help, I'm bleeding." Long story short, we found out she was actively miscarrying in the lobby. She went to the back room for emergent care while a surgical room was prepped and she was, of course, crying and moaning and seemed to be in immense pain. The husband was stoic the whole time, nonplussed, not bothered in the least. He frowned at her moaning and said, "Will you knock it off? You're embarrassing me." He even had the nerve to ask us to watch his daughter in our break room while he went for a smoke. Had to have an emergency C-section and my husband was in there watching the whole thing over the sheet. After the baby was born, the doctor removed the placenta and my husband asked, "What is that?" Without missing a beat, the doctor turns to the second doctor assisting, holds it up and says, "I don't know. What is this?" All I could see at this point was my husband's face, and it was so worth it.
Lawyers of Reddit. What's the dumbest thing you've seen take place in front of the judge? Serious replies only, but some of these are pretty funny. Saw one defense attorney demonstrate twerking during closing arguments of an assault with intent to kill trial. Your Honor, my client is not guilty. Why? Let me ask you this. Have you seen this? Throwing it back for a real one? I rest my case. DUI/DWAI/drug defendants show up to criminal court with beer/weed/F the police t-shirts constantly. During the direct examination of the defendant, the PD kept asking leading questions. After 5 or so sustained objections in a row, the judge had enough and sent the jury out of the room to yell at the PD. During the cross, about 10 minutes later, the judge again sent the jury out to yell at the defendant for trying to tell his story instead of just answering yes or no questions, not to mention he was clearly lying through his teeth. Also, the defendant was recorded committing the crime. So yeah, he was later found guilty. I was in front of a judge for oral argument and the other side, pro per, failed to show up. The judge called him and made him argue against our motion while driving and on his cell phone. The judge spoke for a minute, setting up the arguments for the guy, basically leading him to the core argument and what he should be saying if he wanted to get our motion denied. After a few moments of silence, the guy responds, "Judge, I'm too stupid to understand what you just said." That ended the argument quickly and in our favor. Personal story, I was sued once. Well, they meant to sue me, but actually sued my uncle. Same career. Named him in the documents and served him. Me, being young and clueless, thought I should go to the trial just in case. My uncle told me I absolutely should not. Now, here's where the opposing attorney screwed up. They never once tried to interview or talk to me, or my uncle, or they would have realized their mistake. Day of the trial, my uncle actually made it to the stand. From the way I heard it, questioning was hilarious. "Were you working on blah 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 day?" "No." "Please read this payroll statement. Doesn't this payroll statement say you were working?" "No." "Look at this highlighted line. Isn't your name RVW260? "Yes." "Then you were working." "No. This says KVW260 was working." My uncle said even the judge was laughing as he immediately tossed the case. People finding religion in front of a judge at sentencing. The judge would always respond with, "God may have forgiven you, but the state has not." That judge was a boss. Firm, fair, and totally awesome. That's the hardest thing I've ever heard a judge say. One guy I saw said, "Your Honor, I haven't been drinking anymore. I have been clean for 6 months, God is my witness." The judge responded, "Well, a lot of people say that, but the funny thing is, not once have they ever been able to bring him in to testify." The dumbest thing I've seen is a guy show up for not doing his community service in a shirt that said, "I'm not lazy, I just don't like to work." Judge asked him about it, and he said it was his only clean shirt. Everybody had a good laugh, even the judge. Seconds after being served with a protection from abuse order, opposing party flipped off the person who had obtained the order, and seconds after that approached her and asked if they could at least talk about it. Promptly arrested. I'm doing jury selection on a civil case in California. It is going to be a long trial, 6 weeks, so the judge is giving jurors a lot of latitude if they claim any hardship for serving that long. After about 30 minutes of voir dire, which ended up taking 3 days and several panels, one guy stands up and says in very broken English that he can't follow. The judge asks him if he speaks English well enough to render a fair verdict, and he looks confused and says no. The judge thanks him for his service and dismisses him from the panel. In perfect English, accent now gone, he says, "Thank you very much, Your Honor. Where should I put my badge before I leave?" Judge found him in contempt and ordered him to stay for jury duty for the next week. Usually you just stay for 1 day. If you don't get picked for a jury in that day, your service is over. During a plea hearing on a prostitution charge, the state proceeds to give the narrative of events. The SA starts to get a little uncomfortable trying to describe the specific act that led to the arrest. We all know the line he's reading is, quote, "sucked him off," but he's trying to find a nice way to say it for the record. He finally goes, where she then, proceeded to perform, fellatio. As soon as he says fellatio, the defendant stands up and straight up yells, "I didn't do any of that French crap, I gave him a blowjob!" Client said to judge, "Well, that's your opinion. It went as badly as you'd expect." "Thank you, judge. No matter what happens. My objection gets overruled? Thank you, judge. Lose my motion? Thank you, judge. Judge says I'm fat, ugly, and unlovable? Thank you, judge." Unfair dismissal case. My client was summarily terminated for no reason. She recorded the dismissal on a dictaphone. The torrent of misogynistic, hateful abuse her boss spewed at her was unbelievable. He also assaulted her as she was removing the hands-free phone device from her car, repeatedly slammed her leg in the door, causing a fracture, all the while screaming at the top of his lungs, "Screw you, you piece of crap." Suffice to say, we played that tape 1,000,000 times in cross-examination. It was more what didn't take place. I was working for the DA's office, and we had a guy scheduled to appear for a vandalism charge. The guy had a long history of minor offenses, but the judge was in a lenient mood that day, so the guy was probably going to get off light. At the scheduled time, he hasn't showed up. His lawyer tells the judge he hasn't heard from the defendant that day. We wait. 10, 20, 30 minutes. At the half-hour mark, the judge is furious. She angrily tells the lawyer to get out and find his client and get him before her, no matter what it took, or she'd rain heck down upon the defendant. An hour later, the lawyer slinks back into the courtroom. The judge sees him and interrupts another lawyer to call him up to the podium. The poor lawyer proceeds to tell us that the defendant didn't show up because he was actually sitting in jail 2 counties over, having been caught trespassing the night before. Needless to say, that defendant got the book thrown at him. At the end of a DWI trial involving a pretty major wreck, in which the defendant was found guilty, the judge asked the defendant if he had anything he wished to tell the court during the sentencing phase. The guy thought for a second and said, "Your Honor, I'm real sorry. Normally I drive a lot more careful when I'm drunk." Had a client toss his car keys on the defendant table moments before sentencing for his 4th OWI. Judge asked how he got to court. Without blinking, said, "I drove. Why?" Good way to get a quick bail jumping charge for violating his no driving bail condition. We all forget to turn off our phones in court, but I once faced off against a lawyer whose phone rang right while he was in the middle of making his final submission to the judge. Even that might have been forgivable if he hadn't interrupted his submissions to take the call. I swear I was arguing against a preliminary hearing against a defense attorney from out of town, and in the middle of one of his direct examinations, his phone rings and he freaking answers it. "Hello? Oh, hi. Listen, I can't talk. I'm in court." "What? No, I'm in court. I'll call you back." "Sorry, Judge." The look on the judge's face was priceless. Then it was time for him to make the closing argument. He looks at the judge and goes, "One more time, Judge. What were the charges?" "DUI, dude. Just DUI. How did you get through this whole thing and not realize there was only one charge and it was DUI?" This sounds straight out of a lawyer's sitcom, and I would watch the heck out of that. A lot of clients want to speak up, "But Judge, you don't understand." But giving them the look of death and a jab in the ribs usually shuts them up pretty quickly. They're usually pretty okay. I found this gem doing some research one day, quoted from the case. As is evident from the foregoing excerpt from the transcript, the judge would not permit the appellant to speak to the issue of judicial bias. The appellant was agitated. The judge was, no doubt, frustrated. This exchange culminated in the appellant choosing to disrupt the proceedings by commencing to disrobe. The appellant described her actions to the judge as, quote, a form of nonviolent protest, which would continue until the judge would hear her motion for judicial bias. Wish I was there for that one. You don't often hear about a lot of court cases where people take their clothes off, but the formal language used in this makes it 100 times funnier. I do family law. Told 11 clients in a row that they could be drug tested, 5-panel P-test, you need to be clean for about a week. As part of the custody evaluation process, 7 of them failed. Lawyer here, I had a case where I was suing a lesbian on behalf of a former lesbian partner. It was a relationship property case. The one who was being sued put an issue whether they had even been lovers, or whether my client was just a flatmate or boarder in her home for the several years they lived together. I had no idea how I was going to prove that, but it turned out my client had saved all of the soppy love notes that her partner had left on the fridge, most of which were, I love you, you little squishy oyster, and other ribald descriptions. That issue sunk pretty quickly once the box of those were produced. Sorry, that just sounds so wholesome. I would love to be called someone's squishy little oyster. That makes no sense to anyone except me, and that's why that's so special. I've seen a woman pee herself. Situation wasn't so tragic to warrant it, but she was sent back to jail, so understandable. A man called the judge by only his last name, which is great if you think he'll reciprocate the upcoming fist bump, and a large number of high, drunk, and other people say, this is bullcrap. Also not a great technique in court like the first two. I've got a pretty good one, so hope this isn't buried. Husband and wife are going through a divorce and are having a custody hearing. Basically, the attorney is representing the father who wants to be able to have some rights to see his son, but mother has already been awarded full rights. Father's attorney is super passive-aggressive against the mother's attorney, really rubbing everybody the wrong way. Eventually, the mother's attorney snaps and quips back, if he was as good of a father and husband as you claim, we wouldn't be here, would we? Father's attorney has some dumb reply and the judge starts losing his cool. Another few comments later, and the judge ends the hearing. No adjudication, just takes the filings and demands that the parties get out of his chambers. This wasn't in the courtroom itself. In the hallway, the mother's attorney loses his crap, starts yelling at the other attorney. He yells back. They get into a full-on yelling match in the courthouse. Then the father, who is 230 pounds plus, steps between them to entreat them to chill out, starts telling both his lawyer and the wife's attorney that they are acting like children. People in the courthouse are giving them looks, assistants peeking out of doors, and the wife steps in. You're both acting like a couple of kids. Soon-to-be ex-husband and I can handle this on our own. Then the couple who was in the middle of a vicious divorce step aside, talk for a few minutes, and walk back. He's going to take son Tuesday night. You two, he points to the attorneys, do whatever you need to do with the judge. I don't know what happened with that case, but it warmed my heart to see a father step between the two trained legal professionals and impress his wife so much that they were able to work things out. The sad part? The husband's lawyer saw it as a win for him because his conduct put his client in a position to, quote, break up the fight and show her that he is a great guy. Update, for those asking, this was in 2009. I don't know the final disposition of the case, just that the mother agreed to let the father spend some time with their son. And yes, this is a true story. I will never forget. We had a defendant bust into the court from the local jail. His case was called and he promptly walked up the podium, looked the judge dead in the eye, and crapped his pants, jumpsuit. He knew he was going back to prison and just wanted to cause as much havoc as possible. People were gagging and there was a general sense of, did that just happen? In the air. I'm going to start off with some context. This event took place on the first day of a murder trial in the Hong Kong High Court. Now, the official language used in the high courts of Hong Kong is English and not Cantonese. The judge for this particular case was British, but the lead prosecuting attorney was from Hong Kong. Whenever he spoke, the judge had a hard time understanding him. To make things worse, the trial and evidence packet composed by the prosecution was a complete mess and did not include an English version. During the opening statement, the lead prosecution attorney decided that he needed to grab his colleague and act out the murder in order to get the message across. This was not pre-planned, and to make a long story short, the judge adjourned about an hour in to postpone the trial in order for the prosecution to, quote, sort out this mess. That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen in a trial, and I can't imagine how desperate the prosecution was to do such a thing. A case where a large gangster-type defendant was accused of slashing the throat of a small, skinny guy. The defense counsel made him wear a large coat to conceal his size, and brought in an interpreter to slowly translate each word of the proceedings because, quote, he had absolutely no understanding of English. 10 minutes into the trial, a cell phone goes off and rings for about a minute. The judge is furious, and the ringing is amplified in the large courtroom. The hearing stops, and everyone is looking around trying to figure out where the sound is coming from. Suddenly, the defendant stands up and pulls the phone out of his pocket. It is still ringing, but only louder. The defendant then yells, "Hey judge, I don't know how to turn my phone off." On a hearing regarding a restraining order requested against him, a man raised to the defense of, quote, "She be trippin'." Restraining order granted. God bless General Sessions Court. When I was in law school, my school had a mock trial program that took place at the local county court, where the judges were actual judges, prosecutors, and attorneys from the local area. So one day, a mock trial is happening, and one student, who was a law student but not in the mock trial program, is acting as a witness being questioned on the stand. The person was getting a little too rude acting in character, so the judge, who was an actual judge, admonished him to tone it down. The student didn't listen, so the judge took them to a little side chat and told him he really needs to stop. The student blows up at the judge and tells him that he doesn't have to listen to a petty state court judge and proceeded to verbally assault him. Judge filed an assault charge, student was kicked out of school for damaging the school's relationship with the local courts, and I would imagine likely never got admitted to another law school, or, if they did, would have a hard time passing the character and fitness test to practice law in that state. This is a much longer story, but I am on mobile. Anyways, a guy came into court on a pervert charge. His friend is a lawyer who comes into court with a black suit, snakeskin boots, and a bolo tie. It is glorious how slimy he looks. When he gets up to talk to the judge, he says, "I've known John for 20 years and he is a good man. He is not a pervert, sir. I should know, because I am one. I miss working for the DA. Sometimes the criminals write themselves." So at the arrest stage, when cautioned, in the UK, any response you give / anything you say under caution is recorded and given as evidence. One of these guys is arrested for a scrap and kicks off in custody, calling us effing this, C-word that. One custody officer goes, "Sir, calm down. You realize everything you say will be recorded and told to the magistrate?" He replied, "Oh, F the magistrate and the frickin' court. The magistrate is a jerk." Court day comes. I'm called to provide evidence to show that the man was badly mannered and aggressive in nature. Amongst other statements and actions he made, I say, "Your worship, whilst in custody, the defendant did not calm, and custody officers' attempts to calm him by warning him that we would provide what he says as evidence to yourself was met with, 'Oh, F the magistrate and their freaking court. The magistrate is a jerk.' Well, that was the end of my evidence, and the court retired for a lunch break. The magistrates went to town on him in sentencing. I only have one. Was in court during a sentencing, and the defendant, not my client, approaches the bench with his attorney. The judge begins to go through the sentencing colloquy, and the man says, "F you, judge." The judge, a female, was pretty shocked and just said, "Excuse me?" I said, "F you, judge. Ain't no woman told me what to do in my life. Sentence me to whatever." She just sat there dumbfounded for a second. Then, "All right, fine, Mr. Blank. I hereby sentence you to life in the penitentiary." Well, that just sounds freaking fantastic. Defendant was already doing a life without parole sentence and had this charge pending when he received his first sentence. He knew he was basically untouchable, and no matter what the judge did, his sentence could never get worse. 2 good stories from arguing motions. 1. I was arguing a case should be dismissed because of a decade-long delay. Sketchy opposing counsel says to me, "Where's your authority to show that delay is long enough?" Judge says, "Right here, case dismissed," and points to his file. Number 2, opposing counsel asked if I was crapping him when I said, despite a typo, the motion could still be granted. I crap you not, he cursed during oral argument. When I was a public defender, I represented a woman in felony DUI trial. It was a felony only because her license was already suspended when she got the DUI. Her BAC was .30, yes, not .03, and there were empty vodka bottles rolling around in her car. I found case law that said the state must prove she actually received notice that her license was suspended in order to charge it as a felony. On my motion after the state's case, again after the defense's case, and again after the jury verdict, the judge grudgingly had to dismiss the felony part because the state couldn't prove the woman ever received notice that her license was suspended. The judge made a very clear record, however, that the conviction for DUI was solid and unaffected by dismissing the felony. Whatever, we beat the felony, which was the difference between 4 months in prison and 24 hours in county jail. That's not the dumb part. This woman was knucking futs and swore she wasn't drunk. Bull crap, she was drunk every time I ever talked to her, and no one would dismiss her case. She filed a lawsuit against the public defender's office, my supervisor personally, me personally, the county superior court, and the judge personally. She would show up at the courthouse every day to, quote, read her file and harass the court staff. The judge eventually barred her from coming to his court without written permission. She started wearing wigs and big hats and sunglasses to skulk around his court unrecognized. No idea what happened to her after that. I swear to drunk I'm not God. We had an expert witness testifying about gunshot residue. He was asked about how long such residue would remain on a given surface. His response, before the court, well, I like to say it's like the difference between love and herpes. Herpes lasts forever. A guy was getting sentenced for stealing, and the judge asked him if he had anything to say before the sentence was passed. These are the words he chose to utter. Your Honor, if I'd known they was watching me, I never would have done it. A guy getting sued for millions for a scam car dealership purchase before retiring to the desert with the scam proceeds showed up on the first day of trial wearing a $50,000 gold watch. His lawyer saw the jury noticing the conspicuous display of wealth and got the guy to ditch the watch, which left him showing a bright white line highlighting his desert tan. The jury was then eyeing him as someone trying to hide his wealth, so to hide the tan line, he showed up on day 2 wearing a $30 Timex. I saw one of the jurors point out his own Timex to his neighbor and shake his head in disgust. Unfortunately, the jury never got to decide that case. They'd have creamed him. Once, I represented a defendant in a defamation case. The plaintiff was crazy and self-represented. He also had a bit of a language barrier and claimed to be a doctor of law in his country of origin. His sentences sounded reasonable, but in an extended conversation, it was clear he was misunderstanding longer words. He was so bad during questioning that I got about 3 different opportunities to cross-examine himself just because his story kept changing. The judge also indicated that I should leave evidence objections to him because there were so many problems with everything he did. At the trial, this man was amazing. I wish my client or I had the money to buy the transcript just for sentimental reasons. One of my favorite exchanges was where he cross-examined my client's witness, who said she had seen the plaintiff yelling at the defendant. What was I saying to her? I don't remember. But you still say I was yelling? Yes, I remembered what you were yelling, but not what words you used. So I was just screaming like this, makes screaming noises at the witness, holds his hands up in the air like, got her, and smiled triumphantly at the judge. Another exchange, same trial to my client. So you say you were scared? Yes, you were very aggressive. But why were you scared? You were yelling at me and you're much taller than me. How many people have I killed? What? How many people have I killed that you know of? I don't know. So why would you be scared if you don't know that I've killed anyone? Same triumphant look at the judge. Another time he said to the judge, I didn't threaten her. Don't be silly. In my culture, if I had threatened to kill her, she would be dead. In cross-examination, I asked him whether he had seen a document that had been filed about the case in another court. I told him that the court had made it public. The judge confirmed it was a public document. The plaintiff yelled, "Are you saying that you have defamed me too?" I also said in closing arguments, Your Honor, it is clear in giving evidence that Mr. Plaintiff had some difficulties with English and did not understand certain words. He may have misinterpreted what my client said. He cannot be relied on for this reason alone. Plaintiff stands up and says, "My English is fine. How many African languages does Mr. Rocco know? Tell me." I did the trial pro bono. I don't regret it. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. I love you, you squishy